My name is Naomi. I am 32 years old, and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful senior wealth manager and forensic accountant, I escaped their toxicity years ago, but maintained occasional contact out of a misplaced sense of obligation. Today, my mother Brenda texted me that our family Thanksgiving dinner was canceled. She claimed the Atlanta storm was too dangerous, the roads were completely flooded, and everyone was simply staying home to be safe. I accepted it without question. But 1 hour later, driving back from an emergency client meeting through Buckhead, I took a detour through my younger sister Kiara and her husband Jamal exclusive gated community. Sure enough, I spotted my father, Reginald vintage Cadillac, and my mother, brand new Lexus, parked perfectly in the sprawling driveway of their $3 million mansion. The rain was heavy, but the betrayal was crystal clear. Sitting in my car, I opened Instagram. Right at the top of my feed, Kiara had just posted a photo of a massive, perfectly roasted turkey surrounded by crystal glasses and expensive champagne. The caption read, "So blessed to have this beautiful, intimate Thanksgiving with my amazing family." I sat in the cold car watching the raindrops slide down my windshield and felt that familiar heavy ache in my chest. I hit the like button. Then I commented, "Looks wonderful. Enjoy the turkey." I refreshed the page. 10 seconds later, my comment was deleted. 5 minutes later, my phone screen lit up like a slot machine. My mother was calling. Then my father. Then Kiara. They were panicking. I simply silenced my phone, grabbed my leather tote bag, and stepped out into the freezing rain. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who completely underestimated your worth and treated you like an outsider in your own bloodline. Growing up in Atlanta, my family was obsessed with appearances, status, and projecting wealth we did not always have. My parents idolized my younger sister Kiara. She was the golden child, a lifestyle influencer who cared only about designer labels, social media metrics, and looking flawless. I was the scapegoat. I was the quiet, analytical daughter who studied finance, wore sensible suits, and preferred reading balance sheets over attending elite country club mixers. They constantly belittled my career, calling me a boring cubicle worker, completely unaware that I had built my own highly lucrative financial management firm from the ground up. I walked up the sweeping stone driveway of Kiara Mansion. The rain soaked my hair, but I did not care. I reached the massive double mahogany front doors. They were unlocked, likely left open for the private catering staff they had hired to serve their intimate family dinner. I pushed the heavy doors open and stepped into the grand foyer. The house smelled of roasted garlic, expensive sage stuffing, and the rich scent of burning cedar from the fireplace. I walked straight toward the formal dining room, my wet heels clicking sharply against the imported Italian marble floors. Laughter echoed from the room. I stepped into the doorway and stood there silently. The scene before me was like a spread from a luxury lifestyle magazine. The long dining table was decorated with tall white candles, gold-rimmed plates, and elaborate floral centerpieces. My father Reginald sat at the head of the table, wearing a crisp, tailored suit, looking every bit the proud patriarch. My mother Brenda sat to his right wearing a diamond necklace and sipping from a crystal flute. Kiara was glowing in a fitted silk dress that highlighted her fake baby bump, leaning against her husband Jamal. Jamal, the fast-talking, flashy crypto and real estate entrepreneur, was standing up. I was adjusting the cuffs of his expensive Tom Ford jacket, holding a glass of champagne right in the middle of delivering a toast about generational wealth and family blessings. Jamal froze first. His champagne flute stopped midway to his mouth. Then Kiara saw me and the color drained completely from her perfectly contoured face. My mother Brenda turned her head, and the moment she locked eyes with me, her jaw dropped. The crystal glass slipped from her manicured fingers and shattered against the marble floor, splashing expensive champagne over her designer shoes. "What the hell are you doing here?" Brenda screamed, her voice shattering the elegant atmosphere. She shot up from her chair, her face contorting with immediate rage. "You always bring this dark, negative energy everywhere you go. Kiara is pregnant and needs a stress-free environment. Why would you bring your bitter single auditor attitude into this blessed house?" I stood my ground, dripping rainwater onto their pristine floor. I thought the storm was too dangerous, Mom, I said, keeping my tone completely calm and even. I thought everyone was staying home to be safe. Why is it that the roads are only too dangerous for the boring single accountant daughter? Reginald slammed his hand down on the mahogany table, making the silverware rattle. How dare you barge into this house uninvited? He barked, pointing a thick finger at me. Your mother made a decision for the peace of this family. We did not want you sitting in the corner judging us, ruining the holiday mood with your broke energy. I looked at my father, the man who was supposed to protect me, who was instead defending a blatant, cruel lie. The pain was sharp, but the anger was stronger. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I had spent my entire adolescence crying in my bedroom while they celebrated Kiara downstairs. I was done shedding tears for people who would gladly watch me drown just to protect their perfect image. You lied to me, I said, simply looking right at my mother. You could have just said you did not want me here, but you chose to play a cowardly game. You deleted my comment because you were terrified your rich friends on social media might realize your family is not as picture-perfect as you pretend it is. Kiara scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. Oh, please, Naomi, stop playing the victim. She rolled her eyes, her fake eyelashes fluttering. You always make everything about you. You are just jealous because Jamal and I have built this incredible life, and you are still single crunching numbers in some depressing office. We did not invite you because you are an embarrassment. You do not fit in with our lifestyle. We have important people dropping by, later investors and socialites. We cannot have you sitting around looking like a miserable tax auditor. Jamal stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Kiara's shoulder. He puffed out his chest, trying to look intimidating. He always wore too much cologne, and the smell of it mixed with the roasted turkey made me feel slightly nauseous. Listen to me very carefully, Naomi, Jamal said, using his deep, authoritative business voice. You are trespassing. This is my $3 million estate, and I will not allow you to disrespect my wife or my in-laws under my roof. You need to turn around, walk back out into that rain, and drive your sad little sedan back to whatever lonely apartment you came from. I simply smiled at him. I did not move a single inch. My silence seemed to infuriate him even more. Did you hear me? Jamal raised his voice, his face reddening with anger. He reached into his tailored pocket and pulled out his latest model smartphone. You do not belong here. You do not have the class, the wealth, or the status to stand in a dining room like this. If you do not leave this property in exactly 5 seconds, I am calling the private neighborhood security. They will drag you out of here in handcuffs, and I will personally press charges for breaking and entering. Brenda nodded vigorously, stepping behind Jamal as if he were her personal savior. Call them, Jamal. Call security right now. She needs to learn a lesson about boundaries. She cannot just ruin our Thanksgiving because she is miserable with her own life. Reginald crossed his arms, staring at me with profound disappointment. You brought this on yourself, Naomi. We tried to spare your feelings by making up an excuse about the rain. But the truth is, you are a failure to this family. You chose a mediocre path. You refused to elevate yourself. Now you are going to be escorted out by security like a common criminal. I watched Jamal unlock his phone, his thumb hovering over the keypad. He looked at me with supreme arrogance, expecting me to beg, expecting me to cry, expecting me to turn around and run away in shame. The entire family was waiting for me to break. They had spent my entire life breaking me down, pushing me aside, and elevating Jamal and Kiara as the ultimate standard of success. But they had no idea who I really was. They had no idea what I did for a living, what I owned, or the immense financial power I held in my hands at that very moment. I stood in the doorway of that grand, ostentatious dining room, the rainwater still dripping from my coat, and I felt a profound, chilling sense of calm wash over me. The time for crying was over. The time for hiding in the shadows of my golden sister was finished. I reached into my designer leather tote bag. I bypassed my car keys. I bypassed my wallet. My fingers wrapped around the cold, smooth metal of my tablet. I pulled it out, woke the screen, and prepared to deliver a reality check that would absolutely decimate the illusion they had all worked so desperately to maintain. Go ahead, Jamal, I whispered softly, stepping fully into the dining room. Call them. Call security. Let us see exactly who they decide to drag out of this house today. Jamal let out a sharp, condescending laugh that echoed off the vaulted ceilings of the grand dining room. He pocketed his phone and took 2 heavy steps toward me, closing the distance until he was looming over my personal space. The overwhelming scent of his designer cologne clashed violently with the smell of roasted turkey and the thick tension in the room. He looked me up and down with absolute disgust, taking in my rain-dampened coat and my sensible heels. "You really think you can walk in here and make demands in my house?" He sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Look around you, Naomi. Take a really good look at what real success looks like. This is a $3 million estate. The marble you are dripping dirty rainwater on was imported straight from Italy. The chandelier hanging over your head costs more than you make in 2 entire years of pushing pencils at whatever boring firm you work for." He gestured expansively around the room, acting like a king defending his castle. "You are nothing but a cubicle-dwelling accountant. You spend your life looking at other people, making real money, and you are so consumed by jealousy that it is rotting you from the inside out. We did not invite you today because your broke energy is frankly embarrassing. I have high net worth friends dropping by later this evening. Real estate moguls, cryptocurrency investors, and people who are actually building generational wealth. I cannot have them walking into my home and seeing my bitter, unsuccessful sister-in-law sitting in the corner radiating misery. You do not belong in a room like this, Naomi. You never have and you never will." My father, Reginald, immediately chimed in, standing up from the head of the table to reinforce Jamal in his delusions. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket and pointed a stern, accusing finger directly at my face. "Listen to your brother-in-law, Naomi." My father barked, his voice full of the patriarchal authority he so desperately clung to. "He is a visionary. Jamal is out here every single day, hustling, making deals, and elevating this family name to a status you could never even comprehend. You have always been jealous of Kiara. Ever since you were little girls, you could never handle the fact that she was destined for greater things, while you were content to settle for a mediocre life." My father shook his head, looking at me as if I were a piece of trash that had somehow blown in through the front door. "We tried to protect your feelings by telling you the storm was too bad. We wanted to spare you the humiliation of sitting at this table and realizing how far behind you have fallen in life. But you just had to force your way in here and ruin a blessed family holiday. You need to turn around and walk out that door right now before Jamal ruins your life. He has powerful lawyers, Naomi. He could destroy your little career with a single phone call. Do not test a man who is light years out of your league." I stood completely still, allowing their insults to wash over me like the cold rain outside. I did not yell. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. A younger version of myself might have crumbled under the weight of my father's harsh words and my brother-in-law's cruel mockery. But the woman standing in their dining room today was not the fragile girl they remembered. I was a predator who had already cornered her prey, and they were completely oblivious to the trap snapping shut around them. I looked at the perfectly set Thanksgiving table. I saw the crystal wine glasses, the expensive silver cutlery, the steaming roasted turkey, and the massive gravy boat resting on a delicate porcelain saucer. I looked at Kiara, who was sitting there with a smug, satisfied grin on her face, gently rubbing her fake baby bump, while she watched her husband and her father tear me apart. With slow, deliberate movements, I reached into my designer leather tote bag. Jamal and my father were too blind in their arrogance to notice that the bag I was carrying was a limited edition piece worth more than Jamal's entire leased wardrobe. I bypassed my keys and my wallet, my fingers wrapped around the cold aluminum frame of my iPad. I pulled the device out of my bag and held it in my hands. A single drop of rainwater had fallen onto the dark screen. I calmly wiped the water away with my thumb. Then I took one step forward and tossed the iPad directly onto the center of their pristine dining table. The heavy device slid across the polished mahogany wood. It slammed hard against the porcelain saucer holding the gravy boat. The impact tipped the boat over, sending a thick wave of dark brown gravy spilling across the immaculate white linen tablecloth. The gravy splashed onto Kiara's expensive silk dress and pooled around the base of the crystal glasses. Kiara let out a piercing shriek, jumping up from her chair and swatting at the stain on her dress. Jamal lunged forward, his face turning bright red with absolute fury. "Are you out of your mind?" Jamal roared, raising his hand as if he wanted to physically throw me out of the room. "I will make you pay for every single thing you just ruined in my house." I looked directly into Jamal's eyes and spoke with cold, dead precision. My voice was completely flat, carrying the lethal authority of a financial executioner. "A $3 million estate?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Jamal, did you forget that you took out a massive second mortgage with Apex Capital exactly 6 months ago?" Jamal froze. The anger in his face instantly vanished, replaced by a sudden sickening wave of pure panic. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I took another step closer to the table, locking my eyes onto his terrified face. "I am the managing partner at Apex Capital," I stated clearly, ensuring every single person in the room heard every single word. "You took a high-interest loan against this property to fund your fake lifestyle, and you are currently 120 days delinquent on your payments. You have ignored every single warning letter my firm sent you." I pointed down at the iPad resting in the spilled gravy. The screen was glowing brightly, displaying the official legal documents. "This house was officially foreclosed on yesterday morning." I continued, my voice slicing through the silent room like a razor blade. "You do not own this property anymore, Jamal. The bank does not own this property. My firm owns this property. And those private security guards you were just threatening to call to have me arrested, they work for the new property management company that my firm hired to secure the neighborhood. You are literally threatening to call my own employees to kick me out of my own property." The silence that fell over the dining room was absolute and suffocating. The only sound was the heavy rain beating against the large glass windows behind the dining table. Jamal's jaw dropped completely open. All the blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a pale, terrified ghost. The expensive designer suit he was wearing suddenly looked like a cheap costume on a fraud who had just been brutally exposed. His hands began to tremble, and he slowly backed away from the table, unable to look me in the eye. Kiara stood completely paralyzed, staring at the legal foreclosure documents glowing on the iPad screen. The reality of my words slowly sank into her mind. The illusion of her perfect, wealthy influencer lifestyle shattered into a million irreparable pieces. She turned to Jamal, her eyes wide with frantic desperation. "Jamal," she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Jamal, tell me she is lying. Tell me this is a joke. Tell me we are not losing the house." Jamal could not speak. He just stared at the floor, breathing heavily, a pathetic shell of the man who had been bragging about generational wealth just 2 minutes ago. My father, Reginald, slumped back into his chair at the head of the table, clutching his chest, as if he had just been physically struck. The golden son-in-law he worshipped was a complete fraud, and the daughter he despised was the one holding the executioner axe. But my mother, Brenda, refused to accept reality. Her entire identity was wrapped up in Kiara fake wealth and Jamal's supposed success. She could not let the golden illusion die. The desperate need to protect her favorite child drove her into a state of absolute madness. "You are a liar!" Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing with unhinged panic. She lunged forward across the ruined Thanksgiving table, her eyes burning with pure hatred. She raised her hand wildly, preparing to slap me across the face to punish me for destroying her perfect family fantasy. "You are making all of this up to ruin him," Brenda screamed, swinging her hand toward my face. "Jamal is a rich man. He has plenty of money. I know he has money because I personally gave him the $150,000 from your grandmother trust fund to start his business." Jamal let out a sharp, condescending laugh that echoed loudly off the vaulted ceilings of the grand dining room. He pocketed his phone with a theatrical flourish and took 2 heavy steps toward me, closing the distance until he was looming directly over my personal space. The overwhelming scent of his heavy designer cologne clashed violently with the warm, comforting smell of roasted turkey and the thick, suffocating tension in the room. He looked me up and down with absolute disgust, taking in my rain-dampened trench coat and my highly sensible unbranded heels. "You really think you can walk in here and make demands in my house?" he sneered, his voice dripping with unrestrained arrogance. "Look around you, Naomi. Take a really good look at what real success actually looks like. This is a $3 million estate." The pristine marble floor you are currently dripping dirty rainwater on was imported straight from Italy. The crystal chandelier hanging over your head costs more than you make in 2 entire years of pushing pencils at whatever boring mid-level accounting firm you work for. He gestured expansively around the large room, acting like a royal king, defending his sacred castle from a lowly peasant. You are absolutely nothing but a miserable cubicle-dwelling accountant. You spend your entire life looking at other people making real money, and you are so consumed by petty jealousy that it is literally rotting you from the inside out. We did not invite you today because your broke negative energy is frankly humiliating. I have highly important high net worth friends dropping by later this evening. Real estate moguls, cryptocurrency investors, and brilliant people who are actually building solid generational wealth. I absolutely cannot have them walking into my luxury home and seeing my bitter, unsuccessful sister-in-law sitting in the corner, radiating sheer misery. You simply do not belong in a spectacular room like this, Naomi. You never have and you never will. My father. Reginald immediately chimed in, standing up quickly from the head of the table to vigorously reinforce Jamal and his grandiose delusions. He adjusted his sharp-tailored suit jacket and pointed a stern, accusing finger directly at my face. "Listen to your brother-in-law, Naomi," my father barked loudly, his voice full of the strict patriarchal authority he so desperately clung to. He is a true visionary. Jamal is out here every single day, hustling aggressively, making massive deals, and elevating this entire family name to a legendary status you could never even begin to comprehend. You have always been terribly jealous of Kiara. Ever since you were little girls, you could never handle the harsh fact that she was explicitly destined for much greater things, while you were perfectly content to settle for a dull, mediocre life. My father shook his head slowly, looking at me as if I were a useless piece of trash that had somehow blown in through the front door. We genuinely tried to protect your fragile feelings by telling you the storm was simply too bad. We generously wanted to spare you the profound humiliation of sitting at this beautiful table and realizing just how far behind you have fallen in life. But you just had to aggressively force your way in here and completely ruin a blessed family holiday. You need to turn around and walk out that door right now before Jamal ruins your life. He has very powerful lawyers, Naomi. He could destroy your little career with a single phone call. Do not test a man who is light years out of your league. I stood completely still, allowing their cruel insults to wash over me like the freezing cold rain outside. I did not yell. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single pathetic tear. A much younger version of myself might have easily crumbled under the crushing weight of my father's harsh words and my brother-in-law cruel mockery. But the strong woman standing in their dining room today was not the fragile, scared girl they remembered from childhood. I was a quiet, calculating predator who had already cornered her unaware prey, and they were completely oblivious to the steel trap rapidly snapping shut around them. I looked at the perfectly set Thanksgiving table. I saw the gleaming crystal wine glasses, the expensive heavy silver cutlery, the steaming roasted turkey, and the massive gravy boat resting gracefully on a delicate porcelain saucer. I looked at Kiara, who was sitting there with a smug, highly satisfied grin on her face, gently rubbing her completely fake baby bump, while she gleefully watched her husband and her father tear me apart verbally. With incredibly slow, deliberate movements, I reached deep into my designer leather tote bag. Jamal and my father were far too blind in their massive arrogance to even notice that the black bag I was carrying was an exclusive limited edition piece worth significantly more than Jamal's entire leased luxury wardrobe. I completely bypassed my car keys and my thick wallet. My fingers wrapped tightly around the cold, smooth aluminum frame of my professional iPad. I pulled the sleek device out of my bag and held it firmly in both my hands. A single round drop of rainwater had fallen onto the dark glass screen. I calmly wiped the water away with my thumb. Then I took one bold step forward and tossed the heavy iPad directly onto the exact center of their pristine decorated dining table. The solid device slid quickly across the highly polished mahogany wood. It slammed incredibly hard against the delicate porcelain saucer holding the hot gravy boat. The sudden violent impact tipped the boat entirely over, sending a thick, heavy wave of dark brown gravy spilling violently across the immaculate white linen tablecloth. The messy gravy splashed heavily onto Kiara's expensive light-colored silk dress and pooled rapidly around the sturdy base of the crystal wine glasses. Kiara let out a loud, piercing shriek, jumping up frantically from her chair and desperately swatting at the ugly dark stain quickly ruining her dress. Jamal lunged forward, his face instantly turning bright red with absolute uncontrollable fury. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Jamal roared loudly, raising his hand aggressively, as if he eagerly wanted to physically throw me right out of the room. "I will definitely make you pay for every single expensive thing you just ruined in my house." I looked directly into Jamal, wide, angry eyes, and spoke with cold, dead, absolute precision. My voice was completely flat, carrying the lethal, undeniable authority of a corporate financial executioner. "A $3 million luxury estate?" I asked softly, tilting my head slightly to the side. "Jamal, did you somehow forget that you secretly took out a massive secondary mortgage with Apex Capital exactly 6 months ago?" Jamal froze completely. The burning anger in his face instantly vanished, entirely replaced by a sudden, deeply sickening wave of pure, unadulterated panic. His mouth opened slightly, but absolutely no words came out. I took another slow, heavy step closer to the table, locking my eyes intensely onto his utterly terrified face. "I am the actual managing partner at Apex Capital," I stated, clearly ensuring every single person standing in the room heard every single devastating word. "You recklessly took a high-interest loan against this specific property to illegally fund your completely fake lifestyle, and you are currently exactly 120 days delinquent on your required monthly payments. You have foolishly ignored every single certified warning letter my financial firm legally sent you." I pointed down sharply at the iPad resting messily in the spilled gravy. The glowing screen was shining brightly, displaying the official stamped legal documents. "This exact house was officially foreclosed on early yesterday morning." I continued, my voice slicing right through the silent room like a freshly sharpened razor blade. "You do not legally own this property anymore, Jamal. The bank does not currently own this property. My private firm securely owns this property. And those tough private security guards you were just loudly threatening to call to have me quickly arrested. They specifically work for the brand new property management company that my firm successfully hired to secure the entire neighborhood. You are literally threatening to aggressively call my own hired employees to kick me directly out of my own legally purchased property." The heavy silence that fell over the grand dining room was completely absolute and totally suffocating. The only sound remaining was the heavy, intense rain forcefully beating against the large glass windows located directly behind the long dining table. Jamal's jaw dropped completely open in shock. All the color drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking exactly like a pale, deeply terrified ghost. The incredibly expensive designer suit he was wearing suddenly looked exactly like a cheap, pathetic costume on a massive fraud who had just been brutally and publicly exposed. His hands began to tremble noticeably, and he slowly backed away from the edge of the table, completely unable to look me directly in the eye. Kiara stood completely paralyzed, staring blindly at the harsh legal foreclosure documents brightly glowing on the dirty iPad screen. The crushing reality of my clear words slowly sank deep into her panicked mind. The grand illusion of her perfect, wealthy social media influencer lifestyle shattered instantly into a million completely irreparable pieces. She quickly turned to Jamal, her eyes wide with frantic, undeniable desperation. "Jamal," she screamed loudly, her voice cracking sharply with rising hysteria. "Jamal, tell me she is lying to us. Tell me this is just a terrible joke. Tell me we are not actually losing the house today." Jamal simply could not speak. He just stared blankly at the floor, breathing very heavily, a completely pathetic broken shell of the arrogant man who had been proudly bragging about generating generational wealth just 2 short minutes ago. My father, Reginald, slumped heavily back into his large chair at the head of the table, tightly clutching his chest, as if he had just been physically struck by lightning. The golden successful son-in-law he so blindly worshipped was an absolute complete fraud, and the daughter he consistently despised was the powerful one currently holding the sharp executioner axe. But my mother Brenda violently refused to accept the harsh reality. Her entire personal identity was tightly wrapped up in Kiara fake wealth and Jamal's supposed financial success. She simply could not let the golden comforting illusion die today. The truly desperate toxic need to fiercely protect her favorite child rapidly drove her into a sudden state of absolute unpredictable madness. "You are a disgusting liar," Brenda shrieked loudly, her shrill voice echoing sharply with totally unhinged panic. She suddenly lunged forward aggressively across the completely ruined Thanksgiving table, her eyes burning brightly with pure, intense hatred. She raised her right hand wildly, preparing to physically slap me hard across the face to forcefully punish me for completely destroying her perfect, flawless family fantasy. "You are making all of this garbage up to intentionally ruin him!" Brenda screamed loudly, swinging her hand violently toward my face. "Jamal is a highly successful rich man. He has plenty of real money. I know for a fact he has actual money because I personally gave him the entire $150,000 directly from your late grandmother's secret trust fund to proudly start his brilliant business." Her sudden, shocking confession hung heavily in the dead silent air of the dining room, completely paralyzing every single person present. The horrific truth had finally been spoken out loud, dragging all the ugly family secrets directly into the blinding light. She had just openly admitted to committing a devastating federal crime merely to protect a total fraud. The absolute magnitude of her desperate, foolish mistake was utterly staggering. Kiara gasped loudly, covering her mouth in pure disbelief. My father stared at his wife with wide, unblinking eyes, entirely unable to process the severe magnitude of the catastrophic betrayal unfolding right before him in the cold, completely ruined room. The heavy silence that followed my mother, arrogant confession felt suffocating. Reginald slowly lowered himself back into his large mahogany chair, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he gripped the armrests. He looked at Brenda as if she were a total stranger, a dangerous criminal standing right in the middle of his sacred family holiday. "You did what?" Reginald whispered, his voice cracking under the intense pressure of the sudden, horrifying revelation. "You gave him her trust fund." "Brenda, how could you possibly access an account that was strictly locked and exclusively in her name?" Brenda did not even flinch. She stood tall, puffing out her chest, radiating a twisted sense of absolute righteous pride. She swung her hand toward my face again, trying to land the physical blow she had missed moments earlier. I did not step back. I shot my hand forward and firmly caught her wrist in midair, my grip tight enough to stop her completely, but controlled enough to show her exactly who held the real power in this room. "Let go of me," Brenda hissed, trying to yank her arm away, but I held it firmly in place, locking my eyes directly onto hers. "You set him up!" she screamed wildly, spittle flying from her mouth as she desperately tried to deflect the blame. "You orchestrated this entire foreclosure just to embarrass your sister. You have always been insanely jealous of Kiara. Ever since you were teenagers, you could never handle the simple fact that she is beautiful, charismatic, and universally loved. Kiara has millions of loyal followers, Naomi. She receives highly exclusive PR packages from the biggest luxury brands in the world. She lives the glorious dream life you could never possibly have because you are too rigid, too boring, and completely lacking in star quality." I released her wrist with a sharp, forceful motion, pushing her hand away. I let out a low, dark chuckle that made my mother stumble backward in genuine confusion. The sheer delusion required to aggressively defend a sinking ship was absolutely breathtaking to witness. "Millions of loyal followers?" I asked, mocking her exact tone. "A glorious dream life built on exclusive luxury brands." I turned my attention away from my mother and focused entirely on Kiara, who was still desperately scrubbing at the dark gravy stain, ruining her light silk dress. Her frantic movements slowed down as she noticed me staring at her with cold, predatory calculation. I reached back into my designer leather tote bag. This time I did not pull out an iPad. I pulled out a thick, heavy stack of printed legal documents and final demand letters bound together by a thick red rubber band. I slapped the heavy stack of papers directly onto the few remaining dry spots of the white linen tablecloth. "Let us talk about those highly exclusive PR packages and that flawless influencer lifestyle," I said, my voice ringing with lethal authority. Kiara, you might have your millions of fake purchased followers fooled, but you cannot trick a forensic accountant who specializes in tracing hidden debt. I picked up the first document and held it up for the entire room to see. PR packages, I asked loudly. Kiara, your primary credit cards are completely maxed out to the absolute limit. You currently owe exactly $150,000 in high-interest consumer debt. These letters are final warnings from 3 different collection agencies threatening to garnish your non-existent wages. Kiara's face turned ash white. She stopped breathing, her chest freezing completely, as I systematically dismantled the fake empire she had spent years carefully curating on social media. But wait! I continued, refusing to give her a single second to recover or formulate a lie. It gets significantly worse. You love to flaunt your massive closet full of designer bags to your impressionable audience. I picked up the next document. Here are the monthly leasing agreements for every single Birkin and Chanel bag you have ever posted on your account. You do not own a single one of them. You rent them by the hour, and you are currently 3 months behind on those rental payments as well. My father let out a loud gasp, rubbing his temples as the migraine of reality set in. But I was not finished. I walked over to the edge of the dining table, running my hand along the polished wood. "And this beautiful, elegant dining table we are standing around?" I asked, tapping my manicured fingernail against the hard surface. "This table, the matching chairs, the crystal chandelier, and the velvet sofas in the living room. None of this belongs to you either. It is all rented from a premier luxury staging company based in downtown Atlanta. And according to this final demand letter, they are officially suing you for breach of contract and severe non-payment. They are scheduled to arrive here tomorrow morning with a moving truck to repossess every single piece of furniture in this house." I dropped the papers back onto the table, staring fiercely at my trembling sister. "Your entire life is a subsidized, pathetic lie, Kiara. You are not a wealthy socialite. You are a broke, drowning fraud who is completely dependent on a man running a failing illegal scheme." Kiara began to hyperventilate. Her shoulders heaved up and down erratically, and she gripped the edge of the rented table to stop herself from collapsing onto the imported floor. The pristine image she guarded with her life had been totally obliterated in front of her father and her husband. She could not speak. She could only stare at the mounting pile of debt collection letters resting in the spilled gravy. Jamal remained backed into a corner, rubbing his face aggressively, completely unable to defend his wife because his own massive financial failures had already been brutally dragged into the light. But my mother Brenda absolutely refused to surrender. Instead of feeling shame or remorse for the devastating criminal actions she had taken to prop up this fake lifestyle, she doubled down with horrifying intensity. She stepped in front of Kiara, shielding her golden child from the harsh, brutal reality of my words. "Do not you dare speak to your sister like that!" Brenda screamed, her face red and distorted with unhinged fury. "Jamal is a true visionary. He is a brilliant entrepreneur. He just hit a minor rough patch because the real estate market is temporarily down. Every great businessman faces temporary setbacks. That is exactly why I had to do what I did. I had to step in and secure the family legacy because I knew a small-minded, bitter person like you would never understand the big picture." I froze completely. The ambient noise in the room seemed to vanish, leaving only the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I narrowed my eyes, staring at the woman who was supposed to protect me, nurture me, and guide me through life. Instead, she had actively sabotaged my future to fund a criminal enterprise. I took a slow, calculated step toward my mother, lowering my voice into a dangerous, quiet register. "What exactly do you mean by what you had to do, Mom?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly level. "I want you to explain it to me very clearly. Tell me exactly how you managed to secure this wonderful family legacy." Brenda lifted her chin proudly, entirely lacking the basic awareness to realize she was standing directly on top of a legal landmine. "I did what any good, supportive mother would do," she declared, her voice dripping with misplaced self-righteousness. "Your grandmother left $150,000 in a locked trust fund meant for your college tuition. But you were just going to waste that money on a boring, useless degree in finance. You were never going to build anything monumental. So I forged the necessary withdrawal documents. I bypassed the bank security protocols, and I drained that account completely. She gestured proudly toward Jamal, who was now shaking his head frantically, trying to silently signal her to shut her mouth. But Brenda was completely oblivious to his warnings. I gave every single penny of your tuition money to Jamal as seed money for his cryptocurrency business, Brenda confessed loudly. I invested in a real winner. I made sure this family had a glorious future. I forced you to work 3 exhausting jobs during your college years because building character is good for people like you. You needed to learn the value of hard work, while Jamal needed the capital to build our empire. The sheer cruelty of her words hung in the air, a heavy, suffocating blanket of absolute betrayal. She had actively watched me suffer. She had watched me work overnight shifts at diners, sleep barely 3 hours a night, and exhaust myself to the point of physical collapse just to afford my textbooks and tuition. She had watched me struggle and bleed for my education, while she secretly handed my rightful inheritance to a fast-talking scammer to fund a fake influencer lifestyle for my spoiled sister. And she was proud of it. She stood there actively boasting about committing a severe federal crime, believing that her twisted justification somehow absolved her of the legal and moral consequences of her actions. She fully expected me to simply bow my head, accept my designated role as the sacrificial family scapegoat, and walk away quietly into the rainy night. A terrifying, serene smile slowly spread across my face. The kind of smile that only appears when a long-awaited, perfectly executed plan finally reaches its lethal climax. I did not scream. I did not cry for the lost years of my youth or the immense pain of my mother's betrayal. The emotional wounds had healed years ago, replaced by cold, hard, calculated logic. I reached into the pocket of my damp trench coat and pulled out my smartphone. The screen was already glowing brightly. I had not been checking the time or ignoring calls. I had been on an active connected phone call for the entire duration of this confrontation. With a swift, decisive motion, I tapped the screen and put the active call on maximum speakerphone volume, holding the device up for the entire silent room to see. "Did you get all of that, Tasha?" I asked, my voice echoing clearly off the high vaulted ceilings of the ruined dining room. The trap was officially set, and the absolute total destruction of my toxic family was about to begin. The heavy silence in the dining room felt like a physical weight pressing down on all of us. My father, Reginald, stood perfectly still at the head of the table. His chest rose and fell with rapid, shallow breaths as his eyes darted between my mother, Brenda, and the towering stack of debt collection letters I had just slammed onto the soiled linen tablecloth. For a brief, fleeting second, I actually thought I saw a flash of genuine realization cross his deeply lined face. I thought that maybe, just maybe, the strict patriarch of our family had finally woken up from the toxic delusion he had been living in for the past 5 years. I genuinely thought he would look at the irrefutable evidence of Jamal failing empire, and Brenda proudly admitted federal crimes, and finally take my side for the very first time in my life. But that fleeting second vanished as quickly as it appeared. The deeply ingrained pride running through his veins simply would not allow him to admit that he had been completely wrong about the golden son-in-law he so blindly worshipped. Admitting that Jamal was a massive financial fraud would mean admitting that my father was a terrible judge of character. It would mean openly acknowledging that the daughter he had treated like an absolute outcast was actually the only genuinely successful person standing in the entire room. His massive inflated ego simply could not handle that crushing reality. Instead of condemning my mother for stealing my rightful inheritance and committing a serious federal offense, my father completely doubled down on his dangerous delusion. His face hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury, and he turned his burning gaze entirely onto me. He aggressively slammed his large fist down onto the back of his dining chair and raised his voice to a booming, commanding volume that was designed to intimidate me into submission. "Your mother did exactly what she had to do for the survival and the ultimate legacy of this family." My father roared, his voice shaking the crystal glasses remaining on the table. He pointed a trembling, furious finger directly at my chest. "You have absolutely no right to walk into this house and judge the difficult financial decisions we had to make to secure our future. Jamal is out here building real generational wealth for all of us. Hai is a visionary entrepreneur, taking massive risks to elevate our family name in Atlanta, while you are just a petty jealous woman trying to tear him down because you could never attract a man of his high caliber. I stared at him in complete disbelief as he passionately defended the man who was actively destroying our family. You were just going to waste that trust fund money on a boring accounting degree anyway. My father continued, his tone dripping with profound disrespect for my entire career. You were going to spend $150,000 just to learn how to sit at a desk and count other people's money. Jamal needed that capital to build an empire. We are a family, Naomi. The money belongs to all of us. Your mother made a strategic executive decision to reallocate those stagnant funds into a high-yield business venture that would benefit everyone, including you, if you had ever bothered to show a little bit of loyalty. He took a heavy step toward me, trying to use his physical presence to force me to back down. You are no daughter of mine, he spat the words, hitting me like verbal venom. You want to put your own mother in federal prison over some pocket change. You want to call the authorities and destroy your sister-perfect marriage just because you are bitter and alone. Fine. You want to play hardball with your own blood. Then consider yourself completely cut off. You are entirely dead to me, Naomi. My father puffed out his chest, standing tall with a sickening sense of supreme financial confidence. You think you are so smart with your little forensic audits and your collection letters. But you are incredibly short-sighted. You are getting absolutely nothing from me when I pass away. I officially disown you right here and right now. And frankly, you are going to deeply regret this massive mistake, because I just made the greatest financial move of my entire life. He turned to look at Jamal with eyes full of absolute blind adoration. Jamal stood in the corner, still pale and sweating. But my father was too wrapped up in his own fantasy to notice the sheer terror radiating from his son-in-law. Just yesterday morning, I completely liquidated my entire $1.5 million retirement pension from the city of Atlanta, my father announced proudly, his voice echoing with absolute triumph. 30 years of my hard-earned money pulled entirely out of those slow, useless government bonds. I wired every single last cent of my life savings directly into Jamal exclusive offshore cryptocurrency hedge fund. A heavy, sickening feeling instantly dropped into the very bottom of my stomach. I knew exactly what my father had done, but hearing him say it out loud with such intense, foolish pride was completely surreal. Jamal personally guarantees a 30% annual return on my investment, my father bragged, folding his arms across his chest and glaring at me with a triumphant smirk. Do you even know what kind of money that is, Naomi? We are going to be multimillionaires within the next 2 years. Jamal is going to purchase a massive custom-built compound for the entire family, and we are going to live in absolute luxury. And you will not see a single dime of it. You will be completely written out of my will forever. You can go back to your miserable, lonely life and audit taxes for the rest of your miserable days while we travel the world on private jets. The sheer magnitude of his financial ignorance was absolutely staggering. He had literally handed his entire life savings to a desperate drowning scammer who was currently defaulting on rented furniture. Hearing her father's aggressive defense and his declaration of their impending massive wealth seemed to instantly revive Kiara's shattered confidence. The stark, terrifying reality of the foreclosure documents and the rented dining table was temporarily pushed aside by her desperate need to believe in her husband's fake empire. She stood up a little taller, smoothing down the gravy-stained silk of her expensive maternity dress, and stepped right up next to Jamal, linking her arm tightly through his. "See, Naomi." Kiara taunted, her voice regaining that familiar, haughty, spoiled influencer tone she loved to use against me. Daddy knows exactly who the real winner is in this family. He knows how to spot a true genius, and he trusts my husband implicitly. Jamal is going to buy us a real permanent mansion outright with straight cash. We will not need to rent anything ever again. We are going to have a staff, a fleet of luxury cars, and a trust fund for my baby that will make your little $150,000 look like absolute pocket change. Kiara let out a sharp, cruel laugh, tossing her hair over her shoulder and looking down her nose at me. You really thought you did something here today, didn't you? You thought you could walk in here with some printed papers and destroy my perfect life. But all you did was prove exactly how bitter and pathetic you really are. You can take your little iPad and your boring foreclosure documents and you can completely rot. You are entirely dead to us. Jamal tried to pull his arm away from Kiara, his eyes darting frantically around the room looking for an exit, but Kiara held on tight, completely oblivious to his severe mounting panic. Brenda was nodding along vigorously, wiping a stray tear from her cheek and looking at my father like he was the ultimate hero who had just saved their family from my evil clutches. They stood there, a unified front of absolute toxic delusion, proudly celebrating a massive financial victory that simply did not exist. They were fully convinced they had won the battle. They believed my father's $1.5 million pension had secured their luxurious future and permanently put me in my place. I did not flinch. I did not frown. I did not show a single ounce of intimidation or defeat. Instead, a slow, terrifyingly serene smile spread across my face. It was a smile of pure, calculated execution. I looked at my father, who was still glaring at me with intense paternal hatred, and I felt a profound sense of absolute liberation. The final lingering thread of guilt I might have had for completely destroying them entirely evaporated in that exact moment. They had made their choices, and now it was time for me to deliver the final lethal blow. I turned my back on them and casually walked over to the massive 85-inch OLED flat-screen television mounted seamlessly onto the far wall of their rented dining room. The television was currently displaying a high-definition loop of a crackling fireplace designed to add a cozy upscale ambiance to their fake Thanksgiving dinner. I reached out and picked up the sleek silver remote control resting on the nearby marble credenza. With a quick press of a button, I switched the television input from the fireplace loop to the wireless screen mirroring network. "What are you doing?" Kiara snapped loudly, her voice tinged with a sudden spike of nervous anxiety. "Turn that off and get out of our house right now." I completely ignored her. I smoothly unlocked my smartphone, tapped the screen, mirroring icon, and seamlessly cast my device directly to the massive 85-inch television on the wall. The screen instantly went black for a brief second before my phone display illuminated the entire room in bright, glaring high definition. I turned back around to face my father, my smile completely gone, replaced by the cold, hard stare of a senior forensic auditor who was about to dismantle an entire life. "You should really hold on to that will, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling pitch that commanded absolute attention. "Do not burn it and do not throw it away. You are going to desperately need that specific piece of paper when you meet with your lawyers next week to officially declare complete total Chapter 7 bankruptcy." My father's face twisted in confusion. "Bankruptcy?" he scoffed aggressively, taking a step toward me. "What kind of nonsense are you talking about now? I just told you I am a millionaire." "You are completely destitute, Dad," I corrected him sharply, my voice echoing in the large room. "You are 62 years old, and you have absolutely nothing left to your name. You gave away your entire future to a desperate lying scammer. And since you refuse to believe the printed documents on the table, I am going to make this incredibly easy for you to understand." I raised my phone in my hand, preparing to swipe to the first slide of a highly classified digital presentation. "You all love to mock my career," I said, staring directly into Jamal, terrified, sweat-soaked face. "You love to call me a boring cubicle-dwelling accountant. Well, tonight you are all going to get a front-row seat to a professional masterclass. Pay very close attention to the screen behind me. Let me show you exactly what a federal forensic accountant actually does for a living." The moment the high-definition screen of the massive television shifted to display the crisp, bold logo of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Jamal completely lost whatever tiny fraction of sanity he had left. The color drained so rapidly from his face that his skin took on a sickening grayish hue. He let out a raw, guttural sound that was somewhere between a desperate gasp and an animalistic roar. Pure, unadulterated panic completely overrode his previous arrogance. He lunged violently across the ruined dining room, his expensive leather shoes slipping wildly on the spilled gravy and polished marble. "Turn that off," Jamal screamed, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "You cannot show that. That is highly confidential information. You are violating strict non-disclosure agreements, Naomi. Those are proprietary algorithms you are projecting. I will sue you for corporate espionage. I will have you locked up for stealing my proprietary trading secrets." He scrambled desperately toward the wall-mounted television, reaching out with trembling hands trying to find the power cord to rip it straight out of the wall. He was acting like a trapped rat, frantically trying to plunge the room back into comfortable darkness. I did not even flinch. I easily sidestepped his frantic, clumsy movements, moving with the calm, graceful precision of someone who had anticipated his exact reaction. I simply tapped the screen of my smartphone, which was securely connected to the television via a wireless encrypted network. Pulling the plug would not save him now. The data was already stored safely in the cloud and currently sitting on the desks of federal investigators. "Sit down, Jamal," I commanded, my voice cutting through his hysterical shouting like a sharp blade. "There are no non-disclosure agreements to violate because there is no actual company. There are no proprietary algorithms because you are not a software engineer. You are just a pathetic, desperate con artist who learned how to use financial buzzwords to rob your own family blind." I tapped my phone screen again, advancing to the very first slide of the comprehensive forensic presentation. The 85-inch screen illuminated the dark dining room, casting a harsh, bright white light over the faces of my horrified family. "This is the official unredacted SEC incident report," I announced, my voice steady and unwavering. "I personally compiled every single page of this document over the last 2 months. I tracked every single penny that moved through your fraudulent accounts, and I submitted this exact report directly to the federal authorities 3 days ago." My father, Reginald, stood paralyzed, his eyes glued to the massive screen. The bold financial charts and severe legal warnings displayed on the television were completely shattering the false reality he had so proudly constructed. "Let us take a very close look at your brilliant generational wealth, Dad," I said, turning my attention directly to the man who had just proudly disowned me. "You confidently told me that you wired your entire $1.5 million city pension into Jamal exclusive offshore cryptocurrency hedge fund. You mocked my career and told me that Jamal was guaranteeing you a massive 30% annual return." I swiped my finger across the phone screen. A highly detailed financial flowchart appeared on the television. It featured clear red arrows, tracking the exact path of my father's retirement money from the moment it left his bank account. "Look at the screen, Dad," I instructed, pointing at the large red numbers. "I traced the specific wire transfer you authorized yesterday morning. I followed your $1.5 million through the banking system. And I need you to understand something very clearly right now. Your life savings never went into any offshore cryptocurrency exchange. Your money never purchased a single digital asset. Your money never bought any lucrative commercial real estate in Atlanta." My father squinted at the screen, his mouth falling open as he tried to comprehend the complex financial data displayed before him. "There is no offshore hedge fund," I stated bluntly, stripping away the final layers of Jamal's elaborate deception. "There is no cryptocurrency portfolio. There is no 30% return. Jamal's entire business is nothing but a massive, highly illegal house of cards. He is running a textbook Ponzi scheme, and you, Dad, were just his latest gullible victim." Jamal pressed his back against the wall, breathing heavily, shaking his head in frantic denial. "She is lying, Reginald." Jamal stammered, sweat pouring down his forehead. "She hacked my accounts. She manufactured these documents to ruin me because she hates Kiara. Do not listen to her." I ignored his pathetic whining and tapped the screen again, zooming in on the center of the flowchart. "Let us break down exactly where your $1.5 million actually went within the first 24 hours. I continued, forcing my father to face the catastrophic reality of his foolish financial decision. "According to these authenticated banking records, Jamal immediately split your pension money into 3 separate hidden accounts." I highlighted the first large block of missing funds. $500,000 went directly to pay off a group of extremely angry early investors, I explained. These were people Jamal scammed last year. They were threatening to go to the police because he had not paid them their promised returns. "He took your hard-earned retirement money, Dad, and he used it to silence the people he robbed before you. That is the exact definition of a Ponzi scheme. He is paying old victims with new victim money to keep himself out of prison." Kiara let out a loud, dramatic gasp, covering her mouth with both hands. She stared at Jamal, her eyes wide with total disbelief. But wait, the financial mismanagement gets significantly worse, I said, swiping to the next section of the damning report. I highlighted a second massive chunk of my father-vanished pension. $300,000 was wired directly to an offshore sports betting syndicate. I revealed, my voice dripping with absolute disgust. Jamal is not a financial genius. He has a severe out-of-control gambling addiction. He took $300,000 of your pension and wired it to illegal bookies in Las Vegas to cover massive sports betting debts he racked up over the past 6 months. He literally gambled away your retirement on football games. My father's legs seemed to give out beneath him. He grabbed the back of a heavy wooden dining chair to keep himself from collapsing entirely onto the floor. He stared at the television screen, his chest heaving, his eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of absolute shock and pure devastating heartbreak. "And what about the rest of it?" my father whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the heavy rain outside. "What happened to the rest of my money, Naomi?" I swiped to the final section of the current slide. The remaining $700,000 was systematically funneled into a highly complex web of anonymous shell limited liability companies, I explained, outlining the intricate money laundering operation. Jamal set up dozens of fake corporations to hide the money from the IRS. He moved the funds around rapidly to obscure the paper trail, making it incredibly difficult for regular law enforcement to track. But he severely underestimated my forensic capabilities. I found every single hidden account. I uncovered every single fake corporate entity. I paused, letting the absolute finality of my words sink into their minds. "You have absolutely nothing left." "Dad," I said, my voice lacking any trace of sympathy. "You handed 30 years of your blood, sweat, and tears to a common street hustler wearing a leased designer suit. You disowned me to protect a man who robbed you blind without a second thought." Reginald stumbled backward, his face turning an alarming shade of gray. The undeniable truth was finally breaking through his stubborn patriarchal pride. He clutched his chest tightly, breathing in short, ragged gasps. "No," my father muttered, shaking his head wildly, refusing to accept the total destruction of his life. "No, this simply cannot be true." Jamal showed me the investment portfolio. Jamal showed me the cryptocurrency application on his phone. I saw the numbers going up. I saw the profits with my own two eyes. My father turned toward Jamal, desperation bleeding into his voice. "Show me the app, Jamal. Take out your phone right now and show me the secure investment app. Prove to her that my money is safe. Prove to her that you are generating the 30% return you explicitly promised me." Jamal just stood there, paralyzed against the wall, completely unable to produce the fake application he had been using to deceive my father. He looked down at his expensive Italian leather shoes, utterly defeated and completely trapped. "He cannot show you the application, Dad," I said, breaking the agonizing silence. "Because the application is a complete fake. He paid a freelance software developer $200 to build a dummy interface that simply displays random green numbers moving upward. It is not connected to any real financial market. It is a digital mirage designed specifically to trick gullible, greedy investors like you into handing over their life savings." My father let out a low, agonizing groan, leaning heavily against the dining table. The golden illusion of his impending millions had instantly turned into a nightmare of complete, total poverty. He was 62 years old, and he had just willingly bankrupted himself. But I was not finished. The professional audit was only halfway done. "You think losing your entire pension to a fake hedge fund is the worst part of this evening?" I asked, my tone shifting to a sharper, more dangerous edge. I turned my attention away from my devastated father and looked directly at Kiara, who was trembling uncontrollably in her ruined silk dress. "I promised you all a complete, comprehensive presentation," I stated firmly. "And I never leave a financial audit unfinished. Losing money to a bad investment is tragic, but losing money to fund a humiliating betrayal is absolutely unforgivable." I raised my phone, preparing to deliver the final lethal strike to their perfect family facade. "Let me show you exactly where the stolen money from my grandmother trust fund actually went," I announced. I swiped my thumb across the screen, advancing the presentation to the very next slide. The massive television shifted, revealing a highly detailed breakdown of the most humiliating financial expenditure of all. The heavy silence following my mother arrogant confession was suddenly shattered by Kiara. She violently pushed herself away from the rented dining table, her face contorted with a desperate, frantic energy. She refused to look at the undeniable proof glowing on the massive television screen. Instead, she pointed a manicured finger directly at my face, her voice echoing with shrill, aggressive denial. "You fabricated every single piece of this!" she screamed, her whole body trembling with rage. "You hired some shady graphic designer to create these fake bank statements just to ruin my perfect life. Jamal is a brilliant investor. He loves me. He is the father of my child. You are just a bitter, ugly college dropout who has always been obsessed with destroying my happiness because you have absolutely nothing going for yourself." Jamal eagerly latched onto his wife, frantic defense like a drowning man grabbing a life preserver. "Yes," he stammered, wiping the heavy sweat from his forehead with the back of his trembling hand. "She fabricated the documents, Kiara. She is trying to divide our family. She is trying to steal my company assets by creating fake SEC reports. You know how jealous she is of our success. Do not look at the screen, baby. Do not let her manipulate your mind." I stood my ground, watching them desperately cling to a sinking ship. The sheer magnitude of their shared delusion was almost fascinating to witness. Kiara was willing to ignore the federal government and her own common sense just to maintain the shallow illusion of her luxury lifestyle. I did not raise my voice to argue with them. I simply raised my smartphone and tapped the screen once more. "You think I fabricated federal banking records to spite you?" I asked, my voice projecting a calm, lethal authority over their pathetic shouting. "Let us examine the exact wire transfers made exactly 14 days ago. Let us follow the precise path of the $150,000 our mother stole from my locked trust fund." The massive OLED television screen shifted instantly. The complex flowchart of Jamal failed business ventures disappeared entirely. In its place, a crystal-clear high-definition scan of an official wire transfer receipt illuminated the dark room. The document bore the unmistakable logo of the bank my grandmother had used for my trust fund. I highlighted the specific routing numbers with a bright red digital marker. "This money did not go to pay off angry investors, Kiara," I explained methodically, ensuring every word cut deep into her fragile reality. "This specific money did not go to the illegal sports bookies in Las Vegas, and it certainly did not go toward any legitimate cryptocurrency exchange." Jamal let out a loud, panicked gasp. He lunged forward again, slipping on the ruined marble floor, his arms reaching out desperately, as if he could physically block the television screen with his own body. "Naomi, stop," he begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine. "I will pay you back. I will give you whatever you want. Just turn the screen off. Please turn it off." I completely ignored his pathetic pleading. I swiped my finger across my phone screen, advancing to the next piece of devastating financial evidence. A pristine, highly detailed residential lease agreement appeared on the large television screen. Right next to it was a digital copy of a brand new vehicle title issued by the state of Georgia. Jamal did not lose all of the stolen money to bad investments or gambling debts, I announced, my voice echoing coldly through the grand dining room. He took $200,000 of stolen family money, and he used it to secure a very specific lifestyle right here in the city. I walked slowly toward the television, pointing directly at the glowing lease agreement. 2 weeks ago, Jamal signed a 2-year binding lease for a spectacular luxury penthouse apartment located in the most expensive high-rise building in Midtown Atlanta. He paid the entire 2-year lease completely upfront in straight cash, using the exact funds stolen from my trust fund for a fraction of a second. A desperate, hopeful light flickered in her eyes as her delusional mind tried to twist this new information into something positive. "A penthouse," she whispered, her voice shaking with raw vulnerability. "Jamal, did you buy us a penthouse in Midtown? Were you planning to surprise me for the new baby? Is that why you took the money?" My father, Reginald, lifted his head, looking at Jamal with a sudden spark of renewed hope. "Maybe the boy was just securing real estate," Reginald muttered, trying to convince himself that his life savings were not entirely gone. "Maybe he was diversifying his asset portfolio." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that immediately killed their brief moment of foolish hope. My laugh was cold and sharp, slicing through the heavy tension in the room. You really think he bought that penthouse for you, Kiara? I asked, my tone dripping with absolute pity for her profound ignorance. You really think a man who has been lying to you about his entire career is secretly buying you luxury real estate? Let us take a very close look at the signatures on these legally binding documents. I tapped my phone screen, zooming in heavily on the bottom of the lease agreement and the vehicle title. The massive television displayed the distinct cursive signatures in bright glowing letters. I want you to read the name on that lease, Kiara. I commanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Read the name of the registered owner of the brand new fully loaded Range Rover parked in the private garage of that midtown penthouse. Kiara squinted at the large television screen. Her eyes darted back and forth as she read the legal documents. Her entire body went completely rigid. Her mouth fell open, but no sound emerged. The name on the lease agreement was not Jamal. The name on the vehicle title was not Kiara. The legal documents were signed and registered exclusively to a woman named Destiny. Who is Destiny? Kiara finally managed to choke out her voice, barely a hollow whisper. She slowly turned her head to look at Jamal, who was now pressing himself completely flat against the far wall, looking as though he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. Jamal, who is Destiny? Jamal opened his mouth to speak, but he was trembling so violently that his teeth were visibly chattering. He shook his head back and forth, offering no defense and no explanation. Since your husband is suddenly experiencing a severe loss of words, I will gladly introduce you to the newest member of his payroll, I announced, swiping my finger across my phone screen for the final time. The dry legal documents vanished from the television screen. They were instantly replaced by a series of high-resolution, vibrant photographs. The entire dining room erupted into a collective gasp of pure, unadulterated horror. The photographs displayed on the 85-inch screen were undeniably explicit and deeply humiliating. They featured Jamal, wearing his expensive designer swimming trunks, lounging on the deck of a private luxury yacht. Sitting directly on his lap with her arms wrapped tightly around his neck was a stunning 22-year-old Instagram model. She was wearing a tiny designer bikini and a massive diamond tennis necklace that Kiara had repeatedly begged Jamal to buy for her anniversary. I pulled these photographs directly from her public social media accounts. I explained, my voice steady and completely devoid of mercy. Jamal told you he was flying to Miami for an intensive week-long cryptocurrency networking conference last month. He was not attending any conferences, Kiara. I was spending the stolen family money to fund a lavish double life with a 22-year-old model. The photographs automatically cycled through a digital slideshow on the television. Jamal and Destiny drinking expensive champagne at an exclusive Miami nightclub. Jamal kissing Destiny cheek while she showed off the keys to her brand new Range Rover. Jamal and Destiny posing intimately inside the massive Midtown Atlanta penthouse that was paid for with my stolen tuition money and my father liquidated retirement pension. I was not just stealing the family money, Kiara, I stated, delivering the final crushing blow to her perfect illusion. He was actively using your mother's stolen funds and your father's entire life savings to completely finance a luxurious double life with another woman. He is not a wealthy entrepreneur. He is a broke, unemployed fraud who used your family's desperate need for status to fund his own personal playground. The silence in the room shattered completely. The grand illusion of the Golden family was instantly and permanently destroyed. Kiara let out a loud, blood-curdling scream that sounded like a wounded animal. The sound tore through the dining room, echoing violently against the high ceilings. The fake, sophisticated persona she had maintained for years vanished in a single explosive second. She lunged across the ruined dining room table, completely ignoring the spilled gravy and the shattered crystal glasses. She threw herself entirely at Jamal, her hands curled into tight, aggressive fists. "You disgusting, pathetic liar!" Kiara shrieked at the top of her lungs, swinging her arms wildly and striking Jamal repeatedly across his face and chest. "You used my family money to buy a car for a common street tramp. You ruined my life. You ruined everything." Jamal tried to shield his face, raising his arms to block her frantic blows, but Kiara was fueled by pure hysterical rage. She grabbed the lapels of his expensive Tom Ford suit jacket and yanked him forward, tearing the fabric completely. She slapped him hard across the cheek, leaving a bright red mark on his skin. The physical and emotional chaos in the room erupted into total, absolute pandemonium. My father, Reginald, shouted out in shock, rushing forward to pull his screaming daughter off the man who had just bankrupted him. My mother, Brenda, dropped to her knees on the marble floor, sobbing uncontrollably as she watched the complete destruction of her favorite child-perfect marriage. I stood perfectly still, watching the entire scene unfold, with a deep, profound sense of absolute calm. The carefully constructed lies had finally collapsed, and the truth was burning everything to the ground. The absolute bedlam, rapidly consuming the grand dining room, was entirely completely unstoppable. Reginald lunged forward frantically, attempting to physically separate his golden daughter from his fraudulent son-in-law, but he was completely unable to halt the explosive chaos. Kiara was entirely beyond reason. She grabbed a heavy rented porcelain dinner plate and hurled it directly at Jamal's head. The expensive plate narrowly missed his face and shattered violently against the custom wallpaper, sending sharp, jagged ceramic shards flying across the room. Jamal ducked quickly, raising his arms defensively, as Kiara grabbed a crystal wine glass next. "You lied to me about absolutely everything," Kiara shrieked, her voice hoarse and raw with pure, uncontrolled hysteria. "You made me look like an absolute pathetic fool in front of my entire family and all of my followers. You actively spent my money on some cheap Miami model while I was sitting here actively defending your fake business empire to everyone." Jamal stumbled backward, slipping again on the spreading puddle of spilled hot gravy and shattered crystal. He collided heavily with the edge of the dining table, sending the large roasted turkey sliding precariously close to the edge. "Stop acting like a crazy, deranged woman," Jamal yelled aggressively, pushing himself back upright and glaring at his wife with intense, unmasked hatred. "You are just as completely fake as I am, Kiara. Do not stand there and pretend you are some innocent victim in this marriage." Kiara grabbed another heavy plate, her chest heaving as hot tears of absolute humiliation poured down her ruined, perfect makeup. "I gave you everything," Kiara sobbed wildly, tearing at her own hair. "I supported your ridiculous ventures. I even totally faked this entire stupid pregnancy just to keep you from leaving me for that Miami tramp, because I knew you were secretly planning to formally file for divorce." The sudden shocking confession echoed loudly over the harsh sound of the heavy rain beating against the large glass windows. My mother, Brenda, let out a loud, horrifying gasp, covering her mouth with both trembling hands. My father, Reginald, froze, completely staring at Kiara's previously cherished flat stomach with wide, unblinking eyes. "You faked an entire pregnancy," Brenda whispered, her voice trembling with profound, sickening disbelief. "Kiara, how could you possibly lie to us about a precious baby?" Kiara completely ignored our mother, keeping her furious, tear-filled eyes locked entirely on Jamal. She aggressively ripped the thick padded silicone maternity bump out from under her ruined expensive silk dress and threw it violently onto the messy floor. "I did it to save our public image," Kiara screamed desperately, kicking the silicone bump away. "I did it to force you to stay and build our luxury brand." Jamal let out a cruel, loud, mocking laugh that sliced through the heavy tension like a serrated knife. He aggressively shoved Kiara backward, forcing her to stumble away from him. "You really genuinely think a fake baby was going to keep me eternally tied to your miserable, exhausting, high-maintenance lifestyle?" Jamal yelled viciously, his face twisting into an ugly mask of pure, toxic arrogance. "I never actually loved you, Kiara. You are exhausting, shallow, and completely obsessed with your fake social media status. I only married you for one specific reason. I married you specifically because your naive, foolish father had a massive, easily accessible city pension and I needed fresh liquid capital to fund my real life." The brutal, callous admission hung heavily in the dead silent air of the ruined dining room. Jamal had just publicly loudly admitted to intentionally manipulating a marriage exclusively to brutally rob an elderly man of his entire life savings. My father, Reginald, completely snapped. The deeply ingrained, stubborn pride running through his thick veins violently mutated into an explosive, blinding physical rage. the harsh, undeniable reality that he was entirely destitute at 62 years old, simply because he had blindly trusted this arrogant, flashy scammer finally forcefully pushed him over the very edge of rational thought. With a loud, terrifying roar of pure, unadulterated primal fury, Reginald lunged aggressively across the room. He tackled Jamal violently, throwing his entire heavy body weight directly into the younger man's chest. The sudden, incredibly forceful impact sent both men crashing brutally onto the top of the meticulously decorated Thanksgiving table. The heavy wooden table groaned loudly under their combined weight before violently, completely collapsing downward. The pristine holiday dinner was instantly entirely trampled underfoot. The massive roasted turkey rolled heavily onto the imported marble floor, landing in a puddle of expensive wine. Heavy ceramic bowls of creamy mashed potatoes and sticky red cranberry sauce shattered violently, sending messy, thick food flying absolutely everywhere. Reginald pinned Jamal aggressively to the ruined floor, his thick, strong hands wrapping tightly around the collar of Jamal's torn, expensive designer suit. Mashed potatoes and bright red sticky cranberry sauce smeared heavily across Jamal's white silk shirt, ruining the Tom Ford jacket entirely. "Give me my money back right now!" Reginald roared fiercely, shaking Jamal violently, pinning him firmly against the cold, hard marble floor. "Give me back my $1.5 million, you disgusting, pathetic, miserable thief. That was my entire retirement. That was 30 years of my blood, sweat, and tears. I will kill you right here and right now if you do not wire my life savings back into my secure bank account immediately." Jamal gasped loudly for air, struggling frantically to push the enraged older man off his chest. He grabbed frantically at Reginald's thick wrists, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple as the physical pressure increased rapidly. "I do not have your money," Jamal choked out desperately, sputtering and coughing as the heavy cranberry sauce smeared directly across his sweating, bruised cheek. "It is completely gone, Reginald. The offshore shell accounts are completely frozen. The illegal sports bookies in Las Vegas took everything else. I am totally, completely broke." Reginald let out an agonizing, heartbreaking cry of pure, absolute despair. He tightened his aggressive grip, violently choking Jamal, who began to thrash around wildly on the slippery, food-covered floor. The two adult men rolled around fiercely, destroying everything in their immediate path. Splintered wood, broken crystal, and mashed food created a chaotic, sickening battleground right in the very middle of the luxury dining room. Kiara collapsed heavily against the far expensive wallpapered wall, sliding down until she hit the floor, pulling her knees tightly to her chest and sobbing uncontrollably as she watched her father physically, brutally assault her fraudulent husband. Her perfect, glamorous influencer life had devolved completely into a violent, horrific, terrifying nightmare. My mother, Brenda, suddenly snapped out of her paralyzed state of shock. But she did not run to actively help her violent husband or comfort her weeping golden child. Her desperate, terrified mind finally realized that the absolute only person in the entire room who held any real, actual financial or legal power was the exact daughter she had viciously abused and completely discarded for decades. Brenda dropped heavily to her trembling knees. She scrambled frantically across the cold, messy floor, completely ignoring the sharp, broken glass and spilled hot gravy, heavily staining her expensive designer dress. She crawled desperately toward me, her hands reaching out wildly until she aggressively grabbed both of my ankles, holding me in place. "Naomi, please," Brenda sobbed loudly, her voice cracking with pure, raw, terrifying hysteria. She gripped my legs tightly, looking up at me with wide, terrified, tear-filled eyes. "You have to stop this immediately. You have to fix this massive disaster right now. You are an incredibly powerful senior wealth manager. You have high-level connections in the federal government. You know exactly how to effectively trace hidden offshore funds. Please, Naomi, you have to legally recover your father's stolen retirement money before we lose absolutely everything." I looked down at the pathetic, broken woman clinging desperately to my sensible shoes. The sheer toxic audacity required to actively beg for my professional help after openly admitting to stealing my college trust fund was absolutely staggering to witness. Brenda tightened her frantic grip on my ankles, tears streaming rapidly down her ruined, perfect makeup. "I am so deeply sorry, Naomi," she cried loudly, shaking her head back and forth wildly. I was completely wrong about Jamal. I was totally blinded by his fake money and his smooth-talking promises. But you are brilliant. You are so incredibly smart and highly successful. You can easily call off the aggressive FBI agents. You can personally contact your friend Tasha and forcefully compel her to entirely drop the federal wire fraud subpoena against me. We are your family, Naomi. We share the same exact blood. I will gladly make it up to you forever. You are my absolute favorite daughter now. I promise I will treat you exactly like royalty if you just save us from total absolute bankruptcy. Her desperate empty promises meant absolutely nothing to me. Calling me her favorite daughter only after she had been brutally stripped of her false wealth and publicly humiliated was the ultimate final insulting slap in the face. She did not actually love me. She simply needed my power, my money, and my immense legal resources to quickly save herself from the horrific incoming consequences of her own terrible, greedy actions. I did not offer her a single word of comfort. I did not bend down to help her up from the dirty, ruined floor. I did not accept her pathetic, shallow apology. With a cold, highly calculated motion, I easily stepped backward, pulling my ankles firmly out of her desperate, frantic grip. My movement was entirely dismissive, leaving her grasping at the cold, empty air. Brenda let out a loud, pathetic wail, collapsing forward onto her hands and sobbing intensely into the spilled food on the floor. I stood perfectly tall, rising entirely above the violent, chaotic mess, consuming my incredibly toxic family. I slowly raised my left wrist and calmly checked the exact time on my solid gold Cartier watch. The precise timing of my elaborate execution was absolutely flawlessly perfect. I casually turned my head away from the violent screaming brawl happening on the floor and looked directly past the chaotic, destroyed dining room. I stared intensely through the large, broken glass panes of the front living room window. Outside, in the heavy, freezing Atlanta rain, the pitch-black driveway was suddenly aggressively illuminated. Silent, bright flashing red and blue emergency lights began to pulse rapidly, reflecting vividly against the wet, dark pavement. The brilliant, colorful strobing lights cut sharply through the heavy rain, completely illuminating the front facade of the foreclosed luxury mansion. The federal authorities had officially arrived right on schedule, and the ultimate trap was completely permanently sealed forever. The flashing red and blue emergency lights painted the ruined dining room in a chaotic strobe effect, reflecting off the shattered crystal and the spilled wine pooling on the marble floor. The intense physical brawl that had just consumed my father and my brother-in-law came to an abrupt, freezing halt. Reginald remained frozen on his hands and knees, his chest heaving, his thick fingers still tangled in the torn fabric of Jamal designer suit jacket. Kiara stopped her frantic, hysterical sobbing mid-breath, her perfectly manicured hands flying up to cover her mouth in absolute terror. Brenda remained paralyzed on the wet floor, her eyes wide and unblinking as she stared blankly towards the front entrance of the mansion. The suffocating silence inside the room was entirely broken by the heavy, aggressive sound of thick combat boots marching rapidly up the stone driveway. Then the pounding began. It was not a polite, casual knock. It was a violent, deafening series of heavy, physical strikes against the massive custom mahogany front doors. The entire front wall of the luxury estate seemed to shake under the sheer force of the blows. Federal agents opened the door immediately. The booming, authoritative voice echoed like a thunderclap through the grand foyer, slicing right through the remaining layers of my family toxic delusion. It was a command backed by the full, lethal, uncompromising weight of the United States government. Jamal's dark eyes widened in pure, unadulterated horror. The false, empty bravado he had worn like a protective shield for the past 5 years instantly completely evaporated into thin air. He violently shoved Reginald's heavy body off his chest with a sudden massive burst of pure, terrified adrenaline. He scrambled frantically to his feet, his expensive Italian leather shoes slipping wildly on the thick, messy puddle of spilled hot gravy and creamy mashed potatoes. He looked exactly like a pathetic, cornered rat, desperately searching for any possible exit to escape his inevitable fate. He locked his panicked, fearful eyes onto the large glass sliding patio doors at the very back of the dining room, which led directly out to the dark, rain-soaked backyard. "I have to go right now," Jamal stammered wildly, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic squeal of pure, raw terror. "I cannot go to a federal prison, Kiara. They will completely, totally destroy me in there." He turned away from his weeping, devastated wife and lunged aggressively towards the back patio doors, his arms pumping frantically. But the heavy, expensive shoes he wore were completely coated in thick, sticky red cranberry sauce and slick, heavy turkey grease. His left foot flew entirely out from under him, and he crashed brutally hard onto the cold, imported marble floor, sliding helplessly across the room like a discarded broken rag doll. Before Jamal could even attempt to physically push himself back up, the massive mahogany front doors were violently breached by the tactical team. A loud, terrifying, splintering crack echoed widely through the rented luxury mansion as the heavy wooden doors swung forcefully open, hitting the interior drywall with a deafening, explosive bang. A highly coordinated, focused team of heavily armed agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division swarmed aggressively into the grand open foyer. The bright, blinding, harsh beams of their heavy-duty tactical flashlights cut sharply through the dim, moody lighting of the formal dining room, illuminating the absolute catastrophic mess of the ruined Thanksgiving dinner and the deeply terrified faces of my thoroughly broken family. "Federal agents, get down on the ground right now." The loud, authoritative commands rang out rapidly from multiple different directions as the highly trained federal agents moved with swift, calculated, lethal precision. Two heavily armed, confident FBI agents rushed directly past a frozen, hyperventilating Kiara and a kneeling, sobbing Brenda, advancing straight toward the back of the spacious dining room, where Jamal was desperately, pitifully trying to crawl slowly toward the locked glass patio doors. They did not give him a single fleeting second to escape or resist their authority. One tall, strong agent grabbed Jamal firmly by the collar of his ruined, expensive suit jacket and slammed him forcefully face down into the slippery, messy marble floor. The sharp, distinct metallic sound of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Jamal's wrists echoed loudly, bringing a deeply satisfying sense of absolute finality to the chaotic, violent scene. "Jamal Williams, you are under official arrest by the direct order of the federal government," the lead FBI agent announced, his voice loud, clear, and completely unwavering as he secured the tight, cold metal restraints. "You are being officially charged with multiple counts of severe tax evasion, massive interstate wire fraud, and actively operating an illegal unregistered Ponzi scheme. You have the right to remain completely silent. Anything you say can and absolutely will be used against you in a federal court of law." Jamal pressed his bruised, sweating cheek heavily against the cold, dirty marble floor, sobbing uncontrollably like a terrified child, as the stern federal agent continued reciting his mandatory Miranda rights. Kiara pressed her back tightly against the expensive custom wallpaper, sliding all the way down until she was sitting flat on the wet floor, covering her ears tightly with both of her shaking hands. She squeezed her eyes shut fiercely, desperately trying to block out the horrific, inescapable reality that her supposedly wealthy, successful husband was currently being handcuffed in their rented dining room like a common street criminal. Reginald slowly, painfully pushed himself up from the ruined floor, his expensive tailored suit completely covered in spilled food, dirty water, and broken glass. He stared blankly, numbly at the federal agents actively swarming the luxury house. His stubborn, deeply ingrained patriarchal pride violently refused to die quietly. He stumbled forward, blindly holding his empty hands up defensively as he cautiously approached a senior IRS criminal investigator who was actively directing the entire chaotic scene from the center of the room. "Officer, you really need to listen to me," Reginald pleaded desperately, his voice shaking with intense, frantic, uncharacteristic urgency. "I am a completely innocent, unsuspecting victim in this terrible, horrifying situation. That miserable man on the floor just stole my entire $1.5 million city retirement pension yesterday morning. He actively lied to me about an exclusive offshore cryptocurrency hedge fund. I need you to immediately freeze his private accounts and quickly wire my entire life savings back to my secure bank. I am a hard-working, honest citizen who was brutally, maliciously scammed by my own terrible son-in-law." The senior IRS agent slowly turned around to face my panicked father, his stern professional expression entirely devoid of any human sympathy. He looked at Reginald with the cold, hard clinical detachment of a seasoned financial investigator who had personally seen this exact pathetic scenario play out 1,000 different times before. "You are Reginald Brooks, correct?" the IRS agent asked, casually consulting a secure digital tablet resting firmly in his left hand. "Yes," Reginald answered eagerly, nodding his head rapidly up and down. "Yes, that is me. I am Reginald Brooks. I need my stolen money returned to me immediately before it disappears entirely." The IRS agent looked up slowly from his glowing tablet and stared directly intensely into my father's desperate, pleading eyes. "I am incredibly afraid that is simply not going to happen, Mr. Brooks. According to the highly comprehensive forensic audit officially submitted to our federal agency earlier this week, you did not just blindly hand over raw cash. You actively, knowingly, and willingly signed multiple fraudulent legal documents explicitly designed to securely hide your liquid financial assets from federal tax authorities. You deliberately, intentionally attempted to evade mandatory capital gains taxes by purposely moving your public pension into an unregistered, highly illegal offshore entity. Because of your direct, willful, undeniable complicity in this massive financial fraud, your personal legal status is definitely not classified as a simple, innocent victim under the parameters of the established federal tax guidelines." Reginald's face turned a highly alarming, sickening shade of pale gray. His mouth opened wide, but he could not formulate a single coherent word. He looked exactly like a man who had just been handed a sudden, unexpected terminal diagnosis. Therefore, the IRS agent continued smoothly, his voice entirely clinical and completely detached from the emotional devastation unfolding around him. "I am formally informing you right now that all of your remaining personal bank accounts, physical assets, and secondary properties are officially entirely frozen, completely effective, immediately pending a full comprehensive federal tax audit. You will absolutely not have access to a single solitary dime of your wealth until our thorough investigation is completely, totally concluded. Have a good evening, sir." My father staggered backward wildly, as if he had just been physically shot directly in the chest. The absolute, crushing, devastating reality of the federal agent words hit his mind with massive, catastrophic force. He had not just simply lost his entire hard-earned retirement pension to a cheap, smooth-talking scammer. By eagerly, greedily trying to cheat the federal government out of required taxes, he had actively, foolishly given the federal authorities the perfect legal justification to instantly, securely freeze whatever tiny fractional amount of wealth he currently had left. I was 62 years old, and he was completely, utterly, totally, and permanently ruined, beyond any hope of financial repair. Brenda remained silently on her bruised, trembling knees in the very middle of the ruined formal dining room. She stared completely blankly at the bright flashing red and blue emergency lights, brightly illuminating the dark, expensive walls. She silently watched the heavily armed federal agents physically forcefully haul a weeping Jamal up from the dirty, messy floor and drag him forcefully, aggressively toward the shattered front door. She quietly watched her previously golden, perfect child, Kiara, rocking back and forth uncontrollably on the wet floor, weeping hysterically loudly over her completely shattered fake influencer lifestyle. She sadly watched her proud, highly arrogant husband collapse heavily into a nearby wooden chair, completely, totally broken, and entirely, absolutely destitute. Slowly, heavily, Brenda turned her tired head and looked directly straight at me. Her wide, utterly terrified eyes met my cold, perfectly calm, unwavering gaze. In that exact suspended moment, the thick, heavy, stubborn veil of her intense narcissistic delusion finally, completely, permanently lifted entirely. She instantly realized the absolute, terrifying, devastating finality of the horrific situation. There were absolutely no more convenient lies left to creatively spin. There were absolutely no more fake, glamorous social media posts left to carefully, strategically create for public consumption. There was absolutely no more stolen trust fund money left to safely, comfortably hide behind. The golden, beautiful empire was entirely, completely dead, and she had absolutely nobody left in the entire world to blame but her own greedy, incredibly toxic self. I did not offer her a single solitary comforting word. I did not show her a single tiny ounce of human pity. I simply turned my body away from the horrific, incredibly chaotic scene actively unfolding in the rented mansion. I calmly, gracefully reached out and picked up my highly expensive designer trench coat from the firm back of an undamaged wooden dining chair. I slowly, deliberately, gracefully slipped my arms smoothly into the long sleeves, adjusting the thick collar perfectly around my neck. I stepped very carefully, gracefully over the shattered pieces of crystal wine glasses and the massive spilled roasted turkey, actively avoiding the disgusting, sticky mess entirely. I was officially preparing to confidently walk out that large front door and leave my deeply, profoundly toxic, completely, totally ruined family behind forever, allowing the gentle rain outside to wash away the very last traces of their horrible existence. I firmly buttoned the thick protective fabric of my beautiful trench coat, fully shielding myself from the damp, bitter cold. I was finally absolutely free. I firmly buttoned the thick protective fabric of my beautiful trench coat, fully shielding myself from the damp, bitter cold. I was finally absolutely free. The two heavily armed federal agents hoisted Jamal roughly from the sticky marble floor, hauling him up by the arms. His legs dangled uselessly beneath him, his expensive designer shoes slipping wildly on the wet tile. They dragged him forcefully toward the shattered mahogany front doors. The heavy, freezing rain instantly battered his face the moment they crossed the threshold. He did not look back. I did not scream for his wife or apologize to my father. He simply kept his head bowed low, letting the Atlanta storm wash away the remaining dignity of a man who had built an entire existence on a foundation of lies. The heavy metal doors of this black federal transport van slammed shut with a sickening thud, echoing loudly down the affluent suburban street. Inside the ruined formal dining room, the atmosphere was thick with the suffocating stench of absolute defeat. Kiara remained seated on the floor, surrounded by the catastrophic wreckage of her fake lavish lifestyle. The massive roasted turkey lay discarded near her feet, soaking into the hem of her expensive maternity dress. She was rocking back and forth, pulling her perfectly styled hair into a tangled, messy knot. She was not crying for the husband who had just been hauled away in handcuffs. She was not crying for the father who had just lost his entire life savings. She was mourning the sudden violent death of her social media empire. She was grieving the absolute loss of her exclusive VIP event invitations, her leased luxury vehicles, and the hollow admiration of millions of strangers on the internet. Her entire identity had been completely tied to a fraudulent narrative, and watching her grapple with her new permanent reality was both pathetic and profoundly satisfying. My father, Reginald, pushed himself up from the heavy wooden dining chair, his joints popping loudly in the quiet room. He looked at me with eyes completely devoid of their usual patriarchal arrogance. He had aged 20 years in the span of 20 minutes. His proud, broad shoulders were completely slumped, and his tailored suit hung off his frame like a dirty, discarded rag. My mother, Brenda, scrambled to her feet, wiping a mixture of expensive mascara and dirty gravy from her tear-stained cheeks. They both looked at me standing calmly by the exit, illuminated by the flashing red and blue emergency lights outside. The profound realization that I was their absolute last remaining lifeline finally pierced through their thick, toxic vanity. Brenda rushed forward, stopping just a few feet away from me. She held her trembling hands out, her voice cracking with desperate, frantic urgency. "Zuri, please, you have to help us," Brenda begged, her tone completely stripped of its usual condescending edge. "You are incredibly rich, Zuri. You have millions of dollars in your firm. You have powerful connections in the federal government. You can easily hire the best defense lawyers in Atlanta for us. You can pay back the bank to stop the foreclosure on this house. Please, Zuri, you cannot just leave your own blood out in the cold rain. We are your family." Reginald immediately joined her desperate pleading, completely abandoning the harsh, cruel threat of disinheritance he had proudly shouted at me just minutes earlier. We made a terrible mistake, Zuri, my father pleaded, his voice shaking with raw vulnerability. We were completely blinded by his flashy money and his smooth-talking promises. But you are our daughter. You are a brilliant, successful financial executive. You know exactly how to navigate these complicated legal systems. You have to save us from this catastrophic nightmare. We will gladly do whatever you want. We will eagerly apologize for everything we ever did wrong. Just please do not turn your back on your own flesh and blood when we need you the most. I stood perfectly still, letting their pathetic, desperate pleas hang in the cold, damp air of the grand foyer. I looked at the two people who had actively made my entire childhood a living nightmare. These were the exact same people who had mocked my career choices, belittled my physical appearance, and proudly openly admitted to stealing my college trust fund just to finance a criminal enterprise. They had spent my entire life loudly celebrating Kiara, while forcefully pushing me into the dark, lonely shadows. Now that their golden child was completely broken, and their golden son-in-law was headed to a federal penitentiary, they suddenly miraculously remembered that I was their daughter. They suddenly wanted to claim my hard-earned wealth and my professional power as their own personal safety net. The sheer, unadulterated, toxic audacity of their request was absolutely breathtaking to witness. I slowly reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a pair of sleek black leather gloves. I calmly slid them onto my hands, carefully adjusting the smooth fabric around my fingers. I did not rush. I wanted them to sit in the agonizing, uncomfortable silence and feel the absolute crushing weight of their impending doom. "You want me to pay for your defense lawyers?" I asked, my voice incredibly soft, but carrying a sharp, lethal edge that made my mother physically flinch. "You want me to use my hard-earned capital to save a rented mansion that was illegally funded by my stolen inheritance? You want me to magically fix the catastrophic financial mess you proudly, eagerly created because you were too busy chasing a fake aesthetic to realize you were funding a massive criminal fraud?" I took one slow, deliberate step toward my father, looking directly into his terrified, wide eyes. "You did not want me sitting at your perfect Thanksgiving table tonight because my honest, hardworking energy did not fit your glamorous, wealthy aesthetic. You actively stole my future to fund a common criminal fake lifestyle because you intensely valued a beautiful lie over your own flesh and blood. You watched me work 3 exhausting jobs to pay for a degree you constantly mocked, and you never once felt a single ounce of guilt. You happily, proudly financed a massive illegal operation because your blinding greed and your desperate, toxic need for social validation completely overrode your basic human decency." My father opened his mouth to offer another pathetic excuse, but I swiftly raised my gloved hand, instantly silencing him. "You are right about one thing, Dad," I stated, my voice completely devoid of any warmth or familial affection. "I am not your daughter anymore. I ceased being your daughter the exact moment you decided my future was expendable. I am not your family. I am not your savior. I am just the cold, calculating auditor who finally balanced your crooked books." Brenda let out a loud, agonizing wail, dropping her face into her hands. Kiara continued to rock back and forth on the floor, completely unresponsive to the devastating conversation happening just feet away from her. The grand illusion they had all worshipped for years was now nothing but dust and ashes blowing away in the harsh winter wind. I turned my back on them and walked purposefully toward the shattered mahogany front doors. The freezing wind whipped through the grand foyer, carrying the sharp metallic scent of the heavy rain and the flashing blue lights of the police cruisers blocking the driveway. I stepped out onto the large covered front porch, feeling the cool, damp air rush over my face. I pulled a sleek black umbrella from my designer bag and smoothly popped it open, the dark fabric snapping taut against the heavy downpour. I paused on the top step and looked back over my shoulder into the ruined, dimly lit dining room. My mother was staring at me with a look of pure, absolute devastation, finally understanding that there was no coming back from this bridge she had so gleefully burned. "Enjoy the holiday," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the loud sound of the pouring rain. "Like you said, Mom, the rain is too heavy. Everyone should stay home." I turned around, gripping the handle of my black umbrella tightly, and walked gracefully down the long, curved stone driveway. The federal agents respectfully stepped aside, allowing me to pass through the chaotic crime scene completely unhindered. I reached my sleek black luxury sedan, parked just outside the heavy iron gates. I unlocked the doors, slid onto the premium leather seats, and started the powerful engine. The warm air rushed from the vents, instantly chasing away the cold. I shifted into drive and slowly pulled away from the glowing red and blue lights. I drove away into the heart of the intense Atlanta storm, leaving the catastrophic mess of my toxic family permanently behind me. 6 months later, the heavy dust finally settled over their ultimate permanent legal and financial fates. The legal system operated with a ruthless cold efficiency that completely matched the hard forensic data I had provided to the federal prosecutors. Jamal's flashy, arrogant demeanor evaporated the absolute second he realized the sheer volume of indisputable evidence stacked high against him. Facing the terrifying reality of a much longer sentence if he dared to take the case to trial, he completely folded under the immense pressure. He eagerly accepted a strict plea deal, confessing openly to massive tax evasion, interstate wire fraud, and orchestrating a highly illegal Ponzi scheme. The federal judge showed absolutely zero leniency during the final sentencing hearing. Jamal received a mandatory 15-year sentence in a high-security federal penitentiary with absolutely no possibility of early parole. The smooth-talking scammer who once bragged endlessly about building generational wealth while wearing incredibly expensive tailored suits was now permanently stripped of his fake luxury identity. He traded his custom Tom Ford jackets and imported Italian leather shoes for a generic, highly uncomfortable orange prison jumpsuit and cheap canvas slip-on sneakers. He would spend the next decade and a half locked securely inside a tiny, bleak concrete cell, completely stripped of his freedom and his stolen, fraudulent wealth. My parents faced a similarly brutal, completely devastating reality. The severe legal and financial consequences of their own deliberate actions crashed down upon them with absolute catastrophic force. The Internal Revenue Service did not care about my father's stubborn patriarchal pride or my mother's desperate, tearful excuses. Because Reginald and Brenda had willingly signed multiple fraudulent financial documents explicitly designed to hide stolen money and actively evade mandatory federal taxes, the government showed them absolutely no mercy. The relentless federal agents systematically stripped them of every single valuable asset they possessed. The remaining balance of my father's liquidated city pension was permanently seized to partially pay back the countless victims Jamal had ruthlessly defrauded. The bank immediately executed the final eviction orders, forcefully removing my parents and my sister from the massive rented $3 million mansion in Buckhead. They were given exactly 2 hours to gather whatever meager personal belongings they could fit into a few cheap cardboard boxes before the property management security team permanently locked the heavy mahogany front doors behind them. Without my stolen trust fund money to illegally support their lavish lifestyle and with their personal bank accounts entirely frozen by the strict federal government, Reginald and Brenda were forced into absolute crushing poverty. They quickly relocated to a tiny, heavily run-down, low-income apartment complex situated on the far isolated outskirts of the city of Atlanta. The harsh, damp apartment featured peeling yellow wallpaper, loudly rattling pipes, and a tiny, cramped kitchen that barely fit a small dining table. The stark, depressing environment was a massive, humiliating downgrade from the sprawling, luxurious estates they had spent their entire lives pretending to easily afford. At 63 years old, my proud, arrogant father was forcefully, violently thrust back into the unforgiving labor market. Completely stripped of his esteemed professional reputation and carrying the heavy dark stain of a federal financial investigation, Reginald could only secure minimum wage employment. He now works the grueling, exhausting night shift as a low-level security guard at a heavily dilapidated strip mall. The man who once sat proudly at the head of a glorious Thanksgiving table mocking my stable career now spends his cold, lonely nights slowly walking around empty, pothole-filled parking lots. He wears a cheap, itchy, oversized polyester uniform, completely devoid of his former arrogant glory, heavily burdened by the crushing, undeniable realization that his own blind, foolish greed permanently destroyed his entire life. My mother Brenda suffered an equally satisfying, thoroughly humiliating massive fall from grace. The deeply narcissistic woman who once proudly flaunted heavy diamond necklaces and expensive designer dresses at exclusive country club mixers was now entirely stripped of her false upper-class identity. Without access to stolen funds or high-limit credit cards, she was forced to accept a highly demanding, low-paying job as a frontline cashier at a crowded, noisy discount grocery store. Her once perfectly styled hair and expensive manicured acrylic nails are completely gone, entirely replaced by a cheap uniform polo shirt and heavily calloused, tired hands. She spends her long, exhausting days standing on her aching feet, endlessly scanning cheap canned goods and bagging discounted groceries for impatient, irritated customers. Every single day, she is forced to brutally swallow her immense toxic pride, permanently trapped in a miserable, grueling existence she used to viciously, cruelly mock others for enduring. The most spectacular, devastating public downfall, however, belonged entirely to my younger sister, Kiara. The golden child, heavily protected and blindly worshipped by my parents, saw her entire fake, glamorous universe completely, violently shatter into a million irreparable tiny pieces. When Jamal was arrested and the federal agents froze his hidden bank accounts, the steady, illegal flow of stolen cash instantly, completely stopped. Within 48 hours, the aggressive collection agencies descended upon her like a pack of starving wolves. The brand new, expensive luxury vehicles she loved to proudly flaunt on her social media pages were promptly, ruthlessly repossessed right out of the driveway by aggressive tow truck drivers. The high-end staging company arrived with a large moving truck and legally forcefully reclaimed every single piece of expensive rented furniture, leaving Kiara standing alone inside an entirely, completely empty, echo-filled mansion before the final eviction. But the absolute worst part for Kiara was the complete, total destruction of her carefully curated, highly fake public image. The local Atlanta gossip blogs and prominent entertainment news websites quickly got hold of the scandalous, highly sensational story. They viciously, ruthlessly exposed every single embarrassing detail of her massive, elaborate fraud. They published the official police reports, the humiliating foreclosure documents, and the highly explicit, embarrassing photographs of Jamal spending the stolen money on a 22-year-old Instagram model in Miami. They even publicly exposed the pathetic, desperate fact that Kiara had completely, entirely faked a pregnancy just to desperately keep her cheating, fraudulent husband from permanently leaving her. Her millions of fake, purchased followers rapidly vanished overnight. The exclusive luxury brand sponsorships and glamorous high society event invitations completely, totally dried up. She became an absolute, complete laughingstock, heavily ridiculed and constantly mocked across the entire internet. The incredibly intense public humiliation forced her to permanently, entirely delete every single one of her social media accounts, retreating completely, entirely into total dark obscurity to hide from the relentless, endless public shame. Without a college degree, without any actual marketable professional skills, and carrying the incredibly heavy burden of massive six-figure consumer debt, Kiara had absolutely no choice but to enter the harsh, demanding retail workforce. She now works a completely exhausting minimum wage retail job, standing behind a small, brightly lit kiosk in a crowded, noisy local shopping mall, selling cheap, heavily discounted phone cases to passing teenagers. She wears a generic, highly unflattering uniform shirt, her head constantly bowed downward, her long hair intentionally hiding her tired face. Whenever wealthy women from her former elite social circles happen to walk past her cheap kiosk, she quickly, desperately turns her back, completely terrified of making awkward eye contact, avoiding the intense, burning shame of being publicly recognized in her new, pathetic, broken reality. The golden child, who once cruelly, arrogantly told me I would rot with my boring legal documents, was now completely, permanently rotting in her own miserable self-made personal hell. She had built her entire shallow existence on a fragile, completely unstable foundation of stolen money and fake internet validation, and she was now paying the ultimate, devastating, heavy price for her extreme, absolute, unchecked vanity. The legal system. The relentless federal investigators, and the unforgiving court of public opinion had completely, thoroughly chewed them up and aggressively spit them out. They were all completely permanently trapped in a miserable, highly exhausting cycle of poverty, debt, and deep, profound public humiliation. They had absolutely nobody left in the world to blame but their own incredibly greedy, deeply toxic, selfish selves. The karma they received was absolutely, completely, thoroughly perfect. While they suffered through the daily, miserable grind of their new, pathetic, broken reality, I was experiencing the exact polar opposite. The dark, heavy, suffocating storm that had surrounded my life for so many incredibly long, painful years had finally completely, permanently passed. The toxic, heavy chains of my family, unrealistic expectations, and their constant, cruel emotional abuse had been completely, totally severed forever. I was no longer the designated scapegoat. I was no longer the quiet, boring accountant, forced to constantly hide in the cold, dark shadows of an entirely fake, deeply flawed golden child. I had completely, successfully, permanently reclaimed my power, my massive wealth, and my profound personal peace. And as the crisp, warm, sunny days of the beautiful spring season slowly transitioned into the hot, vibrant energy of the busy Atlanta summer, my own personal and professional life began to incredibly beautifully soar to brand new, previously completely unimaginable, absolute spectacular heights. Let me confidently, completely, flawlessly, vividly, clearly, happily, freely, gladly, absolutely proudly share exactly what my new, beautiful, peaceful, highly successful, incredibly rewarding, fully authentic, fully liberated, amazing daily routine, and brilliant, completely stunning, vibrant future genuinely actually looked like. The vibrant morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my expansive corner office located on the top floor of a prestigious high-rise building in the bustling heart of Midtown Atlanta. I stood quietly by the pristine glass, looking out over the sprawling, magnificent city skyline, spreading endlessly beneath my feet. This was not a rented luxury estate paid for with stolen funds. This was my actual fully owned professional sanctuary. Every single square inch of this stunning office, from the custom polished walnut desk to the modern leather seating area, was earned through years of my own relentless, exhausting hard work and my unmatched financial intelligence. I had built a highly lucrative independent firm that actively managed the complex portfolios of some of the most prominent wealthy families and elite successful corporations in the entire state of Georgia. I was deeply respected by my loyal peers and genuinely feared by any corrupt executives attempting to hide their fraudulent assets from my highly observant auditing teams. My wealth was real, legitimate, and secured in ironclad accounts that nobody could ever touch. For so many years, I had been aggressively conditioned to believe that I was destined to live a small, quiet, invisible life. My toxic parents had relentlessly tried to shrink my ambitions to ensure I never outshined their beloved golden child. They had told me that my dedication to mathematics and forensic accounting was boring and pathetic. But standing here today looking out over the magnificent, bustling city, I felt an overwhelming sense of profound triumph. I did not need to fake an opulent lifestyle on social media to feel valuable. I did not need to lease expensive designer handbags to convince passing strangers I was successful. True absolute power does not loudly demand constant external validation. True power operates silently, confidently, and decisively behind closed doors, executing massive multi-million-dollar corporate deals that reshape the local economy. My firm had recently finalized 3 major corporate acquisitions, and my net worth had skyrocketed far beyond the fake, superficial numbers Jamal had once bragged about in his rented dining room. I had become the absolute master of my own magnificent, thriving destiny. The frosted glass door of my beautiful corner office swung open, pulling me instantly out of my quiet, reflective thoughts. My brilliant, fierce best friend and federal legal ally, Tasha, strode confidently into the room carrying 2 steaming cups of artisanal coffee from our favorite exclusive local roaster. She was wearing an impeccably tailored, striking crimson power suit that perfectly complemented her sharp demeanor. Tasha had recently been officially promoted to a highly prestigious senior position within the federal prosecutor's office, largely due to her incredibly flawless execution of several massive high-profile financial fraud cases, including the swift, brutal prosecution of my former brother-in-law. We had navigated the treacherous dark waters of corporate corruption and toxic family betrayal together, and emerging completely victorious on the other side, had permanently cemented an unbreakable, deeply loyal sisterhood between us. "Morning, Madam CEO," Tasha announced cheerfully, flashing a bright, brilliant smile as she walked across the plush imported carpet. She set one of the warm, beautifully crafted coffee cups down onto my pristine walnut desk, before dropping comfortably into one of the soft leather guest chairs. "I brought you the usual double-shot dark roast with a splash of oat milk. You are absolutely going to need the extra caffeine boost today, because the federal judge just officially ruled firmly in our favor on the massive Peterson corporate embezzlement case. We completely, totally won the entire settlement, Zuri." I turned away from the sunny window, a genuine bright smile instantly lighting up my face. I walked over to my desk and picked up the warm coffee, breathing in the rich, comforting aroma. "We actually secured the full settlement?" I asked eagerly, leaning against the edge of my wooden desk. Tasha nodded her head vigorously, her dark eyes sparkling with intense, competitive excitement. "We secured absolutely every single penny," Tasha confirmed, proudly letting out a loud, joyful laugh. "Your incredible forensic financial audit completely trapped their corrupt board of directors in a massive, undeniable corner. They had absolutely no legal choice but to completely surrender and agree to pay the $30 million federal restitution penalty. You completely destroyed their fraudulent defense strategy, Zuri. They were absolutely terrified of you taking the witness stand." We shared a moment of joyful triumph, laughing warmly together as we celebrated another massive professional victory. It felt incredibly satisfying to utilize my specific skills to actively tear down corrupt, toxic organizations and restore financial justice to innocent victims. But as our laughter slowly subsided, Tasha's vibrant smile faded slightly, giving way to a more serious, guarded expression. She took a slow sip of her hot coffee and looked at me with a hint of quiet, protective concern in her dark eyes. "There is something else I actually need to quickly mention to you, Zuri," Tasha said, her tone shifting into a highly professional, deeply protective register. "It is regarding a specific phone call your executive assistant intercepted earlier this morning. I happened to be standing near the front reception desk when the call aggressively came through the main switchboard. I took a slow, calm sip of my dark roast coffee, maintaining my perfectly composed posture. My heart rate did not spike. My palms did not sweat. I did not feel the sudden, overwhelming rush of terrifying anxiety that used to grip my chest whenever my toxic family was unexpectedly mentioned. I simply looked at my loyal friend and waited patiently for her to continue delivering the message. "It was your mother," Brenda, Tasha explained quietly, closely watching my facial expression to gauge my emotional reaction. "She was calling your main office line repeatedly and frantically demanding to speak directly with you. Your assistant was incredibly professional, but Brenda was practically hysterical on the phone. She was actively sobbing heavily and desperately begging your assistant to pass along an urgent message. She wanted to ask you for a short-term emergency financial loan. She claimed she needed exactly $400 immediately to pay her overdue electric bill, because the utility company is scheduled to permanently shut off the power to her low-income apartment this afternoon. She told your assistant to heavily emphasize that she is your mother and that you simply cannot let her sit in the dark." I stood perfectly still in my sunlit office, holding my warm coffee cup. I actively searched my own heart, expecting to find a tiny, lingering shred of misplaced daughterly guilt, or perhaps a small twinge of toxic emotional obligation. But I found absolutely nothing. The deep, dark well of sympathy I had once reserved specifically for my parents was completely and permanently bone dry. I felt absolutely no lingering guilt, no hesitation, and zero sorrow. The incredibly heavy, debilitating trauma bond that had chained me to their toxic, narcissistic abuse for 3 entire decades was finally permanently broken. I had fully, totally embraced my hard-earned power and my profound, beautiful, absolute peace. I pressed a small silver button on my sleek desktop intercom system, instantly connecting directly to my executive assistant sitting in the reception area. Yes, Miss Brooks. My highly efficient assistant answered immediately, her voice crisp and professional through the clear speaker. Sarah, I said, speaking in a calm, perfectly level, authoritative voice. Regarding the frantic individual who repeatedly called the switchboard earlier today, claiming to be my mother, I need you to permanently block that specific phone number across our entire corporate communication network. If she attempts to call back using any different phone numbers, you are to instantly hang up immediately without engaging in any conversation whatsoever. Under absolutely no circumstances is that woman or anyone claiming to be my family ever permitted to be connected to my office. Is that completely clearly understood? Absolutely clear, Miss Brooks. Sarah replied instantly, without a single moment of delay. The number is permanently blocked across all channels right now. I released the silver intercom button, severing the connection entirely. I turned back to Tasha, who was smiling proudly at me, silently celebrating my strength. I calmly set my coffee cup down and gracefully reached for a massive multi-million-dollar corporate acquisition contract resting on my polished walnut desk. I picked up my heavy custom-engraved gold fountain pen. I smoothly, confidently signed my name across the bottom line, sealing another highly lucrative, brilliant financial victory for my expanding empire. I was finally completely undeniably free. But as the bright, warm summer months inevitably began fading rapidly into the cool, crisp autumn air, a brand new, entirely different challenge was quietly approaching on the horizon. The highly emotional, demanding upcoming holiday season was drawing near. How exactly does someone who permanently lost their biological family learn to gracefully, properly celebrate Thanksgiving now? The holiday season arrived with a brisk chill in the Atlanta air, bringing with it memories of the chaotic storm that had shattered my life exactly 1 year ago. But today, there was absolutely zero dark dread, clenching my chest. Today was Thanksgiving, and I was finally hosting dinner on my own terms. I walked through the grand arched hallway of my sprawling, newly purchased estate in the prestigious Buckhead neighborhood. Unlike the pathetic illusion, my sister Kiara and her fraudulent husband Jamal had so desperately tried to project, my home was entirely real. There were no shady secondary mortgages attached to my property. There were no fake luxury staging companies threatening repossession. Every single imported marble tile, every custom silk drape, and every inch of the meticulously manicured acreage was completely paid in full by my own legitimate, hard-earned wealth. I had built my kingdom on a rock-solid foundation of brutal honesty and relentless dedication. The rich, comforting aromas of slow-roasted turkey, candied yams, and freshly baked pecan pie drifted through the massive open-concept kitchen. A team of highly professional private caterers moved seamlessly around the large quartz island, preparing a feast fit for royalty. I did not have to lift a single finger today. I was not the designated family scapegoat forced to hide in the kitchen to escape cruel, relentless mockery. I was the honored host, the respected matriarch of my own magnificent reality. I adjusted the sleeves of my elegant emerald green designer dress, feeling completely grounded and wildly powerful. I walked gracefully into my formal dining room to greet my guests. The atmosphere in the room was incredibly warm, vibrant, and overflowing with genuine, unadulterated love. The long, custom-crafted mahogany dining table was surrounded by the beautiful family I had carefully chosen for myself. These were the people who had supported me when I had absolutely nothing and celebrated me when I gained everything. Tasha, my fierce and fiercely loyal best friend, sat near the center of the table, looking radiant in a stunning gold silk blouse. She was laughing loudly, sharing a brilliant legal anecdote with a group of my senior financial analysts. Across from her sat my early corporate mentors, the brilliant men and women who had recognized my sharp analytical mind years ago and actively guided me through the treacherous waters of the elite financial industry. I looked around the massive, beautiful dining room and truly realized exactly how profoundly, deeply different this specific special holiday felt. There was absolutely no lingering anxiety gripping my stomach. There was no desperate need to aggressively prove my worth to people determined to misunderstand me. There were no toxic comparisons, no cruel side glances, and no malicious whispers, carefully designed to tear down my self-esteem. Every single smile in this grand room was entirely authentic. Every compliment spoken was rooted in deep, mutual respect. My chosen family did not care about fake social media metrics or leased designer handbags. They valued integrity, intelligence, and genuine connection. We had all bled for our success, and we were now peacefully reaping the beautiful rewards together. The contrast between this glorious evening and the catastrophic nightmare of last Thanksgiving was absolutely staggering. Exactly 12 months ago, I had stood soaking wet in a rented mansion watching my biological family completely implode under the heavy crushing weight of their own disgusting greed. They had foolishly tried to bury me alive to protect a pathetic scammer, but they only ended up digging their own permanent graves. Now Jamal was locked away in a cold, bleak federal prison cell, eating terrible institutional food. My highly arrogant parents were serving out their twilight years in a cramped, run-down apartment, completely stripped of the fake luxury they worshipped. Kiara was standing behind a cheap retail kiosk, hiding her face from the public in pure, miserable shame. They were completely erased from my glorious universe. Tasha caught my eye from across the dining table and smiled warmly, raising her crystal glass slightly in my direction. The gentle gesture pulled me away from the dark shadows of the past and firmly back into the bright, beautiful light of my present. I walked over to the elegant rolling bar cart and picked up a tall, sparkling crystal flute filled with the most expensive vintage champagne available in the city. I stepped over to the head of the massive dining table. The lively conversations buzzing around the room slowly, naturally quieted down as my chosen family turned their loving, supportive attention entirely toward me. I raised my crystal champagne flute high into the warm, glowing light of the expensive custom chandelier. I looked at the incredible, beautiful faces of the people who truly valued my spirit. I took a deep, calm breath, feeling a profound sense of absolute, overwhelming gratitude washing over my entire soul. To family, I announced, my voice ringing clear, steady, and full of profound joy. Not the family we are randomly born into, but the beautiful, loyal family we actively choose to build for ourselves. To the people who stand firmly by our side during the heaviest, darkest storms, and the people who joyfully celebrate with us when the sun finally decides to shine again. My guests smiled warmly, raising their own crystal glasses in unison, murmuring enthusiastic agreements. I looked down at the sparkling golden liquid in my glass, reflecting on the incredible, grueling journey that had ultimately brought me to this exact perfect moment. I finally deeply understood the absolute truest meaning of sweet justice. The ultimate revenge was not just sending a scammer to a federal prison or bankrupting my toxic parents. The ultimate revenge was becoming so profoundly successful and deeply happy that their entire existence no longer mattered to me at all. She takes a sip of champagne, smiling as the rain falls gently outside her window. This time she is exactly where she belongs, and the storm outside cannot touch her.